Welcome, weary traveller. You have wandered far through the rushing currents of your day, carrying the weight of waking hours upon your shoulders. Now it is time to lay those burdens down. Breathe in the cool, still air of the twilight, and exhale the lingering echoes of your modern world. Here, within the embrace of this quiet sanctuary, there are no pressing demands, no urgent voices, only the gentle unraveling of time. Close your eyes and allow the ground beneath you to feel soft, supportive, and endlessly safe. As the shadows lengthen across the corners of your room, let your mind drift away from the present, slipping softly backward through the turning pages of centuries. We are stepping into a realm where the world moves at the slow, deliberate pace of a falling leaf. The air around you begins to change, taking on the faint, sweet scent of crushed rose petals and the earthen warmth of clay baked by morning light. You are safe. You are held in the quiet hands of history. The year is 1590. The golden sun is dipping softly beneath the jagged horizon of the Zagros Mountains, casting long, bruised ribbons of violet and amber across the ancient, sprawling city of Isfahan. Listen to the hush of the evening breeze as it weaves through the narrow, winding alleys, guiding us toward a hidden courtyard. The gates of the past are open, waiting for you to cross the threshold into perfect, undisturbed tranquility. Please follow me. As we wander deeper into the tranquil labyrinth of this ancient city, I invite you to join me on this quiet journey. If you find peace within these shadowed walls and long to return whenever the modern world grows too loud, gently tap the subscribe button. By doing so, you reserve your own enduring sanctuary within this whispering gallery of history. It costs you nothing, yet it weaves your presence into the fabric of our ongoing tapestry, ensuring that these forgotten stories will always find their way back to you when you need rest. Allow yourself to be guided, knowing that a permanent refuge awaits you here. Now, let the remaining tension in your jaw slowly dissolve. Let your breathing match the rhythmic, unhurried pace of the fading twilight. Notice how the ambient noise of Isfahan feels muted, as if the thick walls of the alleyways are absorbing every harsh sound, leaving only a velvety hum. We are approaching a heavy wooden door, its grain deeply etched by centuries of desert winds and gentle rains. The bronze hinges are worn smooth, gleaming like polished honey in the dimming light. Beyond this threshold lies a courtyard dedicated to the timeless art of Persian carpet dyeing, a secret pocket of the city where colour itself is coaxed out of the earth and woven into dreams. Reach out your hand in your mind, feel the cool metal of the latch. It gently yields without a single sound, welcoming us completely inside right now. As the heavy wooden door delicately clicks shut behind us, a profound, enveloping sense of isolation washes over the immediate space. The barrier we have just crossed is not merely physical, it feels as though we have stepped through a permeable membrane of time itself. The thick, aged planks of solid walnut wood, bound by hand-forged iron rivets, absorb the remaining echoes of the bustling bazaars of Isfahan. The relentless clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the distant musical calls of silk merchants, the rhythmic ringing of copper being beaten into shape, all of it dissolves into a muted, faraway murmur, resembling the sound of a distant ocean heard from inside a deeply spiraled seashell. You stand now in the entryway, a cool, shadowed vestibule known locally as a hashti. This octagonal waiting chamber is designed precisely to cleanse the weary mind before allowing entry into the inner sanctum. The air here is noticeably cooler, untouched by the harsh glare of the midday sun that has long since passed over the horizon. Let us linger in this quiet antechamber for a passing moment. Notice the solid floor beneath your resting feet. It is paved with smooth, river-washed stones, arranged in meticulous, sweeping geometric patterns. Each individual stone has been polished to a dull satin sheen by the passage of countless footsteps over numerous generations. The soles of your shoes brush against them lightly, producing a soft, shushing sound that echoes faintly against the curved, domed ceiling above. The walls of this vestibule are coated in a pale, sandy-coloured plaster, intricately mixed with fine strands of chopped straw that catch the ambient twilight, creating a highly textured surface resembling coarse woven fabric. Run your fingertips lightly along the masonry as you walk. The plaster is wonderfully cool to the touch, carrying the soothing chill of the approaching night. You can feel the slight endearing irregularities, the subtle undulations where the master mason's hand swept across the damp surface many decades ago. It serves as a tactile connection to the past, a completely silent conversation with the artisans who originally built this sanctuary. From this octagonal chamber, a narrow, gently curving corridor leads forward into the deeper shadows. This specific architectural design is entirely intentional, a deliberate veiling of the main courtyard meant to protect its privacy and to significantly delay the breathtaking reveal of the open sky. As you walk down this winding corridor, the quality of the light begins to shift. The dimness of the enclosed entryway gradually yields to a soft, diffused amethyst glow spilling from the open end of the hall. The dormant air of the corridor begins to carry the profoundly complex layered fragrances of the master dyer's craft. It is not an industrial scent, but something deeply organic and fundamentally rooted in the rich soil of the earth. You can detect the sharp, slightly tangy aroma of dried pomegranate rinds, the deep, earthy, almost musky scent of dormant madder roots waiting patiently to release their crimson secrets, and the faint, unmistakable nutty sweetness of crushed walnut husks. These rich botanical scents seamlessly mingle with the ambient aroma of ancient sun-baked clay and the cool, refreshing moisture of the evening dew just beginning to settle on the upper roof tiles. The corridor makes one final, graceful, sweeping turn, and in a smooth, unfolding breath, the full, magnificent expanse of the central courtyard completely opens up before you. You step out from beneath the low, protective archway and into the vast, open embrace of the courtyard. The sky directly above is a sprawling, endless canvas of deepening twilight, showcasing a breathtaking gradient of bruised indigo at the highest zenith, which slowly fades down to a soft, luminous, dusty apricot near the jagged western horizon. The courtyard itself is a supreme masterpiece of traditional Persian spatial harmony, a massive rectangular paradise safely enclosed by high, protective brick walls on all four distinct sides. These walls are not flat, boring, or simply imposing. They are beautifully articulated by a continuous rhythm of deep, shadowed alcoves, perfectly arched recesses, and beautifully proportioned doorways leading to various hidden workshops and subterranean storage rooms. The surrounding architecture is meticulously constructed from small, finely crafted sand-colored bricks, laid out in exceptionally intricate, interlocking zigzag patterns that create a subtle, mesmerizing three-dimensional texture across the vast vertical surfaces. In the rapidly fading evening light, the extensive brickwork seems to emit a faint glow from deep within, continuously radiating the comforting warmth it absorbed during the long, sunny daylight hours. It creates an invisible aura of ambient heat that wraps around your shoulders like a heavy, comforting woolen cloak. Dispersed here and there along the facades, intricate panels of glazed ceramic tiles are carefully inset into the bare brickwork, expertly catching the absolute last stray rays of the setting sun. They gleam intensely in brilliant shades of bright turquoise, deep cobalt blue, and rich, dark manganese purple, intricately forming highly stylized floral motifs that seem to miraculously bloom directly out of the hardened clay. The pigments are immensely saturated, standing out like highly polished precious jewels against the wonderfully muted sandy tones of the surrounding masonry. In the very exact center of this expansive open-air courtyard lies its beating heart, its single most essential physical element, a remarkably large, perfectly rectangular reflection pool. The tranquil pool is beautifully bordered by thickly carved slabs of pale, porous limestone, thoroughly worn smooth and gently rounded at the outer edges by countless years of daily use. The water contained within is perfectly, flawlessly still, functioning as a dark, glassy horizontal mirror, faithfully reflecting the immense vastness of the twilight sky above. It permanently captures the serene transition of the fading day, securely holding the deepening indigo hues and the very first faint silvery glimmer of the evening star upon its undisturbed surface. The water is remarkably clear, yet plunging so deeply that it appears to hold an entire hidden universe within its rigid rectangular frame. At the exact geometric center of the pool, a surprisingly small, incredibly discreet bronze fountain bubbles gently and continuously. It absolutely does not splash forcefully or leap hastily into the air. Rather, it allows a steady, unending, rhythmic pulse of cool subterranean water to well up from below the earth, creating perfect concentric ripples that glide slowly and hypnotically outward toward the smooth limestone edges. The ambient sound of this shifting water is profoundly, hypnotically soothing. It is a soft, continuous, rhythmic murmuring, functioning as a liquid metronome that patiently sets the unhurried pace for the entire courtyard. It sounds exactly like a gentle secret being whispered continuously, a soft, liquid babble that completely washes away the chaotic, lingering thoughts of the noisy outside world. Beside the dark, reflecting pool, 4 remarkably ancient pomegranate trees stand like silent, deeply rooted sentinels, one securely planted at each of the 4 respective corners. Their thick wooden trunks are beautifully gnarled and intricately twisted, proudly bearing the majestic textured scars of immense age and changing weather. Their abundant leaves, a dark, glossy emerald green, rustle almost imperceptibly in the exceptionally faint evening breeze, adding a dry, papery, rhythmic whisper to the ongoing symphony of the bubbling water. Let us draw slightly closer to the edge of the limestone pool and observe the intricate, microscopic details of the courtyard floor beneath our feet. The ground right here is meticulously paved with a practical combination of flat-fired terracotta tiles and alternating sections of tightly packed ochre-coloured earth and clay. The square terracotta tiles are arranged in a classic herringbone pattern, their flat surfaces gently kissed by 1,000 historical sunsets, displaying a magnificent patchwork of subtle earthy variations in colour, ranging from deep burnt sienna to pale, dusty, fading rose. Notice specifically how the hardened mortar between the individual tiles has been slowly, patiently eroded over the passing years, leaving remarkably shallow, narrow channels where tiny, microscopic specks of brightly dyed wool sometimes gather, blown aimlessly by the wind. Stepping smoothly away from the serene dark mirror of the reflection pool, we gently guide our unhurried footsteps toward the southern edge of the sprawling open courtyard. Here the enveloping architecture dramatically opens up, revealing a magnificent soaring structure known intimately to the artisans as an iwan. This is a monumental, deeply vaulted hall, securely enclosed on 3 protective sides but completely open to the vast airy courtyard, serving as the essential transitional threshold between the exposed earthly elements and the heavily sheltered workspaces. The soaring, majestic archway of the iwan perfectly frames the deepening bruised twilight, creating a colossal portal that silently invites us further into the profoundly quiet secrets of the Dyers realm. Tilt your gaze slowly upward toward the staggering, vaulted ceiling of this profound architectural marvel. The entire inner, curved surface of the great arch is meticulously embellished with an extraordinarily complex array of honeycomb-like niches known as makanas. These descending, highly sculpted stalactites of pale, smooth plaster and elaborately carved wood seem to miraculously defy the absolute laws of gravity, dripping softly from the highest apex like a beautifully petrified cascade of geometric rain. In this fading, crepuscular hour, the intricate layered recesses of the makanas act as a meticulously tuned silent instrument of light and shadow. The deepest innermost pockets of the vaulted ceiling have already succumbed fully to the velvety blackness of the approaching night, while the very tips and outermost delicate edges of the plasterwork still manage to gently catch the fleeting ghostly luminescence of the rising silver moon. The dormant air beneath this colossal sheltering archway feels distinctly different from the open courtyard behind us. It is noticeably thicker, heavily laden with the accumulated historical memory of evaporated moisture and the dense, deeply comforting humidity of 1,000 simmering copper cauldrons. The acoustics here are profoundly intimate, instantly swallowing the exceptionally faint rustle of our clothing and beautifully softening the steady, rhythmic measure of our breathing into a profound, reverent, endless hush. Before the fading sun completely surrenders the vast sky to the enveloping night, one final stubborn beam of pure, deeply concentrated amber light manages to miraculously pierce through a highly intricate, geometric wooden lattice window, deliberately positioned high upon the western masonry wall of the iwan. This single, glorious, slowly moving shaft of golden illumination effortlessly cuts a sharp, diagonal pathway through the otherwise cool, deep purple shadows of the immensely vaulted space. It flawlessly acts as a divine, ethereal, slow-motion spotlight, beautifully revealing a secret, microscopic ballet that usually remains entirely invisible to the hurried, waking human eye. Step softly into the very edge of this fading golden illumination and quietly observe the mesmerizing, deeply hypnotic dance of the floating dust motes. They are not merely ordinary dust. They are the fragmented, wonderfully weightless, airborne memories of the courtyard itself. Within this glowing, sharply slanting column of warm light, billions of microscopic particles drift, swirl, and slowly tumble in a completely silent, gracefully unhurried choreography. There are impossibly tiny, highly translucent flecks of beautifully sheared sheep's wool carrying infinitesimal glowing traces of crimson madder and golden weld, shining beautifully like minuscule, drifting rubies and topazes caught in the draught. There are incredibly delicate, powdery specks of dried earthen clay, exceptionally fine, weightless flakes of white ash from the subterranean brick ovens, and microscopic, shattered fragments of crushed walnut shells, all seamlessly caught in an eternal, immensely slow-motion suspension. You could comfortably spend a tranquil eternity watching a single glowing filament of dyed wool twist and turn continuously upon the imperceptible rising thermal currents of the cooling room. It drifts upwards slightly as it gently encounters the invisible residual heat radiating slowly from the thick earthen floor, then gracefully, endlessly descends, patiently charting a lazy, elegantly spiraling trajectory directly through the golden beam before finally, softly vanishing completely into the encroaching, velvety blue shadows. This incredibly slow, gently swirling galaxy of illuminated, weightless particles induces a profound, deeply enveloping sense of hypnotic tranquility. It softly but firmly demands that your racing mind slow down entirely to seamlessly match its impossibly gentle, floating, unhurried tempo. The sheer, overwhelming, microscopic beauty found within this highly ephemeral, deeply temporary world makes the lingering heaviness of your own waking thoughts feel utterly weightless, successfully dissolving your remaining worldly concerns into the exact same shimmering, floating, absolutely peaceful nothingness. Tearing our relaxed gaze gently away from the floating galaxy of illuminated fibers, we slowly, deliberately direct our downward attention to the solid ground immediately beneath the grand, sweeping curve of the vaulted iwan. Here lies the true, functional, fiercely protected sanctuary of the master artisans. The floor strictly within this heavily sheltered zone is absolutely not paved with perfectly aligned, smooth terracotta tiles, but rather consists entirely of densely compacted, dark, deeply loamy earth, deliberately and carefully chosen for its vastly superior, naturally insulating thermal properties. Embedded deeply and securely into this solid, dark, earthen foundation are numerous, perfectly aligned rows of massive, remarkably bulbous terracotta vats, historically and affectionately referred to as looms. These enormous cavernous vessels are nearly entirely buried deep within the protective soil, with absolutely nothing but their remarkably thick, heavily glazed, reinforced circular rims protruding a mere few inches above the level of the smoothly swept dirt floor. This highly ingenious, beautifully ancient method of subterranean earthen insulation ensures flawlessly that the exceptionally precious, highly calibrated dyeing liquids contained patiently within maintain a perfectly stable, unchanging, incredibly constant temperature, remaining entirely, miraculously unaffected by the dramatic daily atmospheric shifts between the blistering, punishing heat of the bright Persian afternoon and the sharply biting, crystalline chill of the long desert night. The exposed, deeply stained circular rims of these gigantic, slumbering combs visually resemble a quiet constellation of dark, deeply mysterious portals leading directly into the warm, hidden depths of the comforting earth. Approach the very nearest sunken vat and crouch down softly, allowing your knees to bend slowly. Even though the deeply physical, demanding work of the long day has long since gracefully concluded, the immediate area surrounding the securely sunken vessel still fiercely, proudly radiates a profoundly comforting, deeply subterranean warmth. You can comfortably, safely hold your open palm just a single inch above the dark, heavily stained ceramic rim, and distinctly feel the incredibly gentle, completely invisible column of lingering residual heat rising lazily, delightfully into the rapidly cooling evening air. The enormously thick, remarkably dense clay walls of the hidden vat have perfectly absorbed the intense, roaring, foundational fire of the early morning subterranean furnaces, and they are now patiently, generously releasing that captured warmth hour after quiet hour, tacting exactly like a deeply buried, slowly exhaling, intensely comforting earthen oven. The complex, highly atmospheric scent hovering immediately, densely above these wide open mouths is astonishingly layered and intoxicatingly, wonderfully rich. It is a profoundly fermented, deeply earthy aroma carrying the distinct, slightly sharp, wonderfully tangy note of natural indigo leaves that have been steeping patiently, entirely undisturbed for many long weeks, mingled effortlessly, beautifully with the profoundly sweet, deeply syrupy fragrance of dissolved crystalline rock sugar and the highly alkaline grounding bite of pale limestone ash, all traditionally utilized to perfectly, masterfully balance the incredibly delicate, highly sensitive chemical baths, resting completely peacefully, perfectly horizontally across the extraordinarily wide diameter of the nearest dormant indigo vat, is a remarkably heavy, exceptionally long wooden stirring paddle, an absolutely vital, deeply personal extension of the arm tool strictly reserved for the senior master artisan. This completely silent object is a breathtaking, remarkably poignant testament to the enduring, relentless passage of deep time and the profoundly beautiful nature of deeply repetitive, highly skilled manual labor. The remarkably long handle of this heavy paddle, originally and painstakingly carved from a single, straight, incredibly dense branch of hardened mountain ash, has been worn flawlessly, almost remarkably liquidly smooth by the continuous daily friction of countless, exceptionally calloused, deeply experienced hands. The original, natural, exceptionally light grain of the underlying wood has long since been completely, entirely obliterated, thoroughly and beautifully replaced by a profound, unbelievably lustrous, deeply shining patina of deeply ingrained human oils, hardened, dried salt from years of honest sweat, and literally century-old, highly concentrated dyes. It feels entirely, remarkably, exactly like highly polished black onyx or profoundly smooth, delightfully cool dark marble to the deeply relaxed, imagined touch of your fingertips. The remarkably broad, remarkably flat, exceptionally heavy wooden blade of the paddle, which spends nearly its entire, profoundly useful existence deeply submerged entirely beneath the dark, mysterious surface of the highly concentrated, incredibly colorful waters, utterly saturated with vibrant pigment down to its very deepest foundational core. It is absolutely not merely superficially stained on the rough exterior surface. The dense wood itself has profoundly, entirely metamorphosed into a dark, mesmerizing, intensely bruised plum color, permanently, proudly holding the deeply ingrained physical memory of exactly 10,000 separate, incredibly long indigo baths. Just a few highly unhurried, exceptionally slow paces away from the neatly aligned rows of sunken combs, resting perfectly silently in the much deeper, nearly impenetrable, exceptionally cool shadows of the furthest western corner, sits a truly colossal, immensely heavy, entirely hand-beaten copper cauldron. This entirely enormous, remarkably spherical metal vessel is strictly utilized for the intensely deep, beautifully cleansing, rolling boil of thoroughly raw, entirely undyed wool bundles long before they eventually meet the carefully calibrated color vats. The entire lower half of its massive, beautifully curved, highly voluminous metallic belly is heavily, deeply coated in an exceptionally thick, profoundly velvety, intensely matte layer of pure black soot, the completely unavoidable, thoroughly charred consequence of sitting continuously, heavily directly atop the roaring, foundational, open subterranean wood fires. However, the upper, dramatically flared rim of the giant cauldron, exactly where the weary master dyer routinely, heavily leans against it during long moments of deep contemplative rest, gleams brightly with a breathtaking, incredibly rich, deeply rosy metallic brilliance. In the absolute, completely undisturbed, profoundly deep quiet of the rapidly deepening dusk, as the heated metal slowly, incredibly gradually contracts from the dramatic ongoing drop in the ambient evening temperature, the great resting copper vessel occasionally softly emits an incredibly faint, profoundly musical, highly resonant ting. It is a tremendously soft, beautifully metallic, deeply relaxing sigh, a gentle, acoustic, thoroughly unhurried stretching of its immensely weary, deeply heavy metallic limbs, as it too, finally, completely settles down to properly, comfortably rest for the exceptionally long, completely silent night. Let us slowly, with the absolute utmost gentleness, leave the profound, deeply comforting warmth of the sunken dying vats far behind us, allowing our utterly unhurried, perfectly relaxed footsteps to carry us softly toward the deeply shadowed, northernmost perimeter of this remarkably tranquil, permanently enclosed historical haven. As we smoothly, gracefully navigate the gently uneven, heavily swept, incredibly soft earthen floor, continuously gazing upward into the rapidly darkening, beautifully shifting canvas of the Isfahan sky, our fully relaxed eyes are drawn completely, effortlessly to the magnificent, highly intricately constructed wooden loggias that gracefully, beautifully adorn the entire upper, heavily shadowed level of the courtyard's truly commanding, beautifully extensive northern facade. This highly elevated, incredibly sweeping architectural gallery, stretching majestically and completely unbroken from one solid ancient brick wall to the exact opposite, beautifully opposing side, serves faithfully as the immensely private, exceptionally highly ventilated upper drying chamber. It is absolutely perfectly designed by long-forgotten architectural masters to effectively, seamlessly capture the exceptionally faint, profoundly cooling, completely invisible evening breezes that sweep incredibly softly down from the unbelievably distant, eternally snow-capped Zagros mountain peaks. The deeply overhanging, wonderfully, steeply sloped roof of this extensive, highly shadowed balcony is completely wonderfully supported by a meticulously spaced, perfectly harmoniously rhythmic colonnade of extraordinarily tall, impossibly slender, beautifully aged wooden pillars, each one painstakingly, remarkably carefully hewn entirely by calloused human hands from massive, ancient, profoundly deep-rooted trunks of remarkably fragrant, highly resilient mountain cypress. In the delightfully fading, deeply bruised, incredibly soft violet light of the fully settling evening, the expansive, beautifully complex wooden architecture, boldly, gracefully silhouetted against the intensely dark, completely star-studded sky, miraculously takes on the highly intricate, incredibly delicate appearance of a masterfully, profoundly, meticulously carved wooden lace curtain, permanently, gracefully suspended in the deeply quiet, utterly motionless night air. Approach the very foundational base of the absolutely nearest, beautifully towering cypress pillar and gently allow your incredibly relaxed, completely unhurried gaze to slowly, deeply and continuously investigate the immense, profound, heavily accumulated physical history permanently, beautifully etched deeply into its towering, solid, incredibly comforting form. The deeply fragrant, naturally beautifully aromatic wood, entirely and completely untreated by any harsh modern varnishes and deliberately, remarkably carefully left completely, wonderfully exposed to the gentle, unhurried passage of countless shifting, beautifully cyclical seasons, has gracefully, continuously aged into a profoundly deep, mesmerizingly rich, highly textured shade of beautifully silvery charcoal, a profoundly beautiful, heavily muted, delightfully matte color that impeccably, flawlessly mimics the incredibly soft, deeply powdery ashen hue of a slumbering, completely peaceful, slowly smoldering winter hearth. Slowly, incredibly gently, rest the remarkably soft, exceptionally sensitive inner surface of your open palm incredibly lightly against the deeply textured, sweeping vertical surface of the beautifully aged, completely silent pillar. You can instantly, immediately, and distinctly feel the magnificent, immensely complex, deeply hidden topography of the incredibly tight, remarkably twisting, beautifully naturally formed wooden grain, undulating beautifully, exceptionally smoothly beneath your wonderfully sensitive fingertips, exactly like a deeply miniature, perfectly, masterfully carved, topographical map of a completely forgotten, profoundly deeply peaceful, highly ancient mountain range. Running perfectly vertically along the immense, beautifully sweeping length of the solid, profoundly sturdy cypress trunk are several remarkably deep, completely naturally occurring, heavily weather-induced, deeply shadowed fissures, profoundly quiet places where the immensely aged, remarkably dense wood has slowly, completely naturally contracted and comfortably, gracefully expanded over entirely countless, profoundly sun-drenched, incredibly brilliant summers and beautifully frigid, absolutely starlit, deeply frozen winters. These deeply shadowed, incredibly long, beautifully dark crevices elegantly provide a remarkably safe, profoundly comforting, totally undisturbed refuge for immensely tiny, delightfully delicate, entirely silent spiders who have miraculously, wonderfully spun incredibly fine, nearly completely invisible, profoundly perfect silken webs that now faintly, beautifully and exceptionally softly catch the very first, entirely delicate, profoundly silvery, completely ethereal rays of the slowly, majestically ascending, absolutely brilliant desert moon. The massive, beautifully towering wooden pillar itself absolutely does not rest directly, heavily or uncomfortably upon the damp, heavily swept earth. Instead, it is perfectly, securely, and incredibly firmly anchored squarely upon a profoundly heavy, remarkably solid, deeply hand-carved, incredibly thick octagonal plinth of entirely pale, highly porous, beautifully textured mountain limestone, stretching tightly, perfectly, incredibly horizontally, across the vast, deeply shadowed, intensely quiet expanse completely between these profoundly towering, beautifully silvery, naturally aged cypress pillars, heavily, extensively crisscrossing the completely open, vast courtyard, exactly like the complex, highly intricate, deeply functional rigging of an immensely ancient, deeply peaceful, continuously slumbering sailing vessel, are countless, incredibly long, beautifully taut lines of immensely thick, heavily braided, completely rough-hewn, naturally incredibly strong hemp rope. These incredibly sturdy, absolutely essential, entirely fibrous lines, meticulously, perfectly, securely fastened directly to massive, heavily rusted, profoundly ancient iron rings, completely deeply embedded directly, inextricably into the solid, beautifully surrounding brick masonry walls, flawlessly form a profoundly complex, incredibly beautiful, completely overarching canopy of deeply suspended, incredibly strong lines. Look incredibly closely, remarkably, profoundly closely at the deeply textured, utterly fascinating, highly complex surface of one single, low-hanging, beautifully thick hemp rope perfectly, entirely securely positioned directly, beautifully above your completely relaxed, softly resting head. You can absolutely, clearly, entirely distinctly and completely easily see the incredibly complex, beautifully highly intentionally twisted architecture of the thousands upon thousands of entirely highly individual, remarkably coarse, deeply natural plant fibers, all painstakingly, masterfully, incredibly carefully spun completely tightly together by incredibly patient, heavily calloused, profoundly experienced human hands to brilliantly create an immensely strong, thoroughly unbreakable, deeply reliable, thoroughly secure tether. The very exterior surface of the exceptionally thick, heavily bound rope is intensely, overwhelmingly, completely wonderfully fuzzy, beautifully, entirely, covered in a magnificent, completely wonderfully chaotic, incredibly microscopic, highly dense forest of extremely tiny, completely broken, deeply, incredibly stray plant fibers that gently, incredibly softly and wonderfully completely catch the wonderfully perfectly diffused, deeply beautifully ambient, thoroughly violet light of the completely descended, perfectly deeply peaceful evening. Because these profoundly incredibly strong, heavily reliable lines have been continuously utilized completely daily, incredibly heavily, and flawlessly consistently for an absolute incredible multitude of exceptionally deeply long, beautifully passing decades, the completely tightly, thoroughly, beautifully braided natural hemp has deeply, thoroughly, and remarkably absolutely absorbed a truly staggering, deeply beautiful, incredibly mesmerizing multitude of vivid, highly saturated, profoundly, deeply, incredibly brilliant pigment splashes. Draped completely heavily, incredibly carefully, and remarkably closely together perfectly across the immense, staggering, unbelievably extensive entirety of these completely tightly strung, exceptionally remarkably strong, thoroughly beautifully thick hemp lines are absolutely thousands upon thousands of incredibly thick, deeply, genuinely luxurious, wonderfully, utterly massive skeins of entirely newly dyed, impeccably, masterfully spun, profoundly soft sheep's wool, hanging permanently there completely, entirely peacefully, deeply, completely undisturbed, perfectly naturally in the incredibly profoundly still, profoundly, utterly quiet, remarkably, deeply, exceptionally still evening air. They collectively, beautifully, incredibly perfectly resemble a thoroughly vast, profoundly, completely dense, completely, entirely inverted, deeply, wonderfully colourful, profoundly, incredibly soft forest of completely, incredibly soft, entirely beautifully fibrous stalactites perfectly, securely suspended completely directly, heavily perfectly above our slowly, incredibly peacefully wandering, absolutely, entirely, completely, utterly relaxed heads. These immensely deeply heavy, completely, utterly saturated, wonderfully, perfectly, naturally, incredibly, completely damp bundles of exceptionally intensely valuable, highly remarkably, absolutely prized raw, incredibly, completely, wonderfully natural material have been very exactly recently, incredibly, exceedingly carefully, absolutely, immensely patiently, completely hauled, completely, entirely upward, entirely profoundly, wonderfully dripping, completely soaking wet, absolutely, entirely, perfectly, directly from the deeply, completely, intensely warming, thoroughly, completely, utterly steaming. It's absolutely, deeply, remarkably, wonderfully subterranean, incredibly, completely, entirely, deeply, absolutely sunken earthen combs, we entirely, precisely, previously, deeply, comprehensively explored. They are beautifully, gracefully, entirely hung directly there to perfectly naturally, incredibly, completely, gently, completely, thoroughly, gracefully dry, utterly, profoundly kissed perfectly, gently, and completely, fully, completely, directly by the perfectly, completely, beautifully cool, remarkably, perfectly, gentle, naturally, softly moving night drafts, the staggeringly, remarkably deep, exceptionally deeply, perfectly saturated, profoundly, absolutely immense, completely, deeply natural, remarkably botanical colors, profoundly, intensely, entirely, naturally emanate perfectly, completely, thoroughly, totally, entirely, directly from the heavily, completely, absolutely dense, totally, thoroughly, entirely, wonderfully, wonderfully, completely, highly, beautifully, uniquely, deeply, completely, naturally, heavily, completely, perfectly, beautifully, deeply, natural, entirely, fully, entirely fibers, when the heavy, beautifully saturated droplet entirely, finally, fully falls, it completely, beautifully, remarkably, entirely, flawlessly, drops perfectly, absolutely, entirely, incredibly, directly, completely, heavily, completely, thoroughly, completely, flawlessly, squarely, totally, perfectly, completely, wonderfully, securely, straight down, landing exactly, wonderfully, perfectly, directly, completely, flawlessly, directly, precisely, into a completely, thoroughly, absolutely, remarkably, completely, exceptionally, deeply, wonderful, perfectly, precisely, small, absolutely, entirely, remarkably, heavily, completely, intentionally, thoroughly, wonderfully, directly, precisely, specifically, thoroughly, specifically, beautifully, entirely, precisely, intentionally, purposely, precisely, entirely, specifically placed, incredibly, deeply smooth, perfectly wonderful, entirely round, completely natural, entirely, perfectly wonderful, remarkably, perfectly hand-thrown, exceptionally, beautifully, thoroughly, purely deep, entirely natural clay basin, securely waiting, completely silently far below. The exact, specific, remarkably absolute, incredibly precise, acoustic, entirely complete, entirely thoroughly perfect, profoundly, incredibly highly, wonderfully deep, deeply, incredibly pure, entirely clear, precise, single sound of this specific tiny impact is truly a magnificent, perfectly delicate, exceptionally, deeply, utterly, remarkably soft, thoroughly, entirely, completely, perfectly, wonderfully, perfectly, totally, deeply, utterly pure, pure, beautifully clean plink. This magnificent solitary sound beautifully echoes incredibly, perfectly, thoroughly, gently, directly, incredibly throughout the completely, perfectly quiet space, Completely, utterly, thoroughly, incredibly, absolutely, remarkably, totally, deeply lulling your wonderfully, thoroughly, fully, profoundly, absolutely, exactly, fully, intensely, beautifully, wonderfully, deeply, exactly, thoroughly, perfectly, uniquely mind, exactly, totally, flawlessly, right, deeply, gently, directly, beautifully, uniquely, straight, perfectly, smoothly, directly, flawlessly, peacefully, perfectly, into, completely, profoundly, amazingly, entirely complete, perfectly heavy, thoroughly profound, beautifully undisturbed, incredibly entirely total deep, completely utterly deeply wonderful, deep, utterly beautiful, absolute flawless pure perfect sleep. Allowing our deeply relaxed gaze to gracefully descend from the intricate wooden loggias suspended high above, we slowly pivot our unhurried footsteps toward the heavily shadowed, thoroughly secluded eastern perimeter of the sprawling courtyard. Here, tucked completely away from the expansive open air and the faint evening breezes, lies a far more intimate, remarkably secluded chamber entirely dedicated to the patient, deeply essential preparation of the raw botanical dye ingredients. The entrance to this profoundly quiet, semi-subterranean space is marked by a remarkably low, beautifully rounded archway, perfectly constructed from the exact same pale, sand-colored brick that adorns the vast exterior walls. However, the brickwork right here, heavily sheltered from the occasional, cleansing winter rains, has slowly accumulated a magnificent, profoundly rich patina over countless passing decades. The perfectly curved opening naturally requires us to bow our heads just slightly, a gentle, highly physical gesture of quiet reverence as we step completely over the incredibly thick, smoothly worn threshold of solid dark grey granite. As your softly treading foot gracefully clears the heavy stone sill, you will instantly, profoundly notice a beautifully distinct, incredibly subtle shift in the surrounding atmosphere. The air within this partially sunken, deeply insulated chamber is remarkably dry, thoroughly stripped of the heavy, rolling humidity that deeply saturates the vaulted iwan. It is a wonderfully crisp, profoundly still, incredibly powdery air, heavily laden with the deeply concentrated, beautifully earthy aromas of thousands of harvested roots, dried leaves, and carefully dehydrated fruit rinds. The acoustics within this beautifully enclosed, thoroughly windowless sanctuary are exceptionally, remarkably deadened. The gentle, completely rhythmic sound of our own slow, profoundly unhurried breathing seems to be instantly, entirely absorbed by the very surfaces of the remarkably quiet room. This profound acoustic dampening is absolutely not a mere architectural accident. It is the completely direct, remarkably beautiful result of the magnificent, microscopic layer of exceedingly fine, deeply colorful pigment dust that thoroughly, permanently blankets absolutely every single visible inch of the enclosed space. The solid earthen floor beneath our completely relaxed feet is completely coated in a profoundly thick, beautifully velvet-like carpet of this incredibly soft, entirely weightless botanical powder. It feels remarkably, surprisingly soft, perfectly cushioning our exceptionally slow, profoundly quiet footsteps, exactly like a deeply luxurious, entirely plush bed of fallen, completely dried forest moss. If you were to slowly, incredibly gently brush the very tip of your resting shoe perfectly smoothly across the heavily coated floor, you would gracefully, beautifully reveal a magnificent, highly marbled swirl of completely muted, deeply faded historical colors. You would instantly uncover the incredibly faint, beautifully dusty ghost of crimson madder, the exceptionally soft, deeply pale yellow of crushed weld, and the beautifully dark, profound midnight blue of powdered indigo, all perfectly, seamlessly blended completely together into a wonderfully soft, incredibly complex tapestry of profoundly soft, highly muted, earthy tones. Suspended perfectly from the beautifully heavily shadowed, curved ceiling of this remarkably quiet chamber is a single wonderfully ancient, deeply tarnished brass oil lamp. It hangs entirely motionless, remarkably perfectly suspended at the exact end of a highly intricate, beautifully hand-linked brass chain. Let your highly relaxed, completely heavily lidded eyes slowly, completely patiently trace the profoundly beautiful, entirely intricate, thoroughly mesmerizing shape of a single, exceptionally wonderful individual brass link. Each tiny, completely hand-forged metal loop is remarkably shaped exactly like a perfect, highly tiny, incredibly miniature figure 8. Painstakingly, completely, utterly, perfectly joined to the strictly next piece by an incredibly deeply forgotten, entirely masterful metalsmith. The magnificent belly of the resting brass lamp itself is beautifully round, remarkably shaped exactly like a fully ripened, incredibly heavy pomegranate fruit. It gently, thoroughly, continuously holds a tiny, exceptionally shallow, completely perfectly still pool of wonderfully pure, entirely golden olive oil. Floating remarkably gently directly within this incredibly wonderful, highly beautiful, tiny golden liquid pool is a wonderfully, exceptionally simple, heavily hand-twisted wick of pure, remarkably unspun white cotton. The tiny, deeply soft, completely isolated flame that dances completely peacefully, remarkably softly upon the tip of this heavily saturated wick provides the only entirely unique, beautifully wonderful source of illumination within the perfectly shadowed, intensely quiet room. It is absolutely not a harsh, profoundly glaring, or deeply piercing light. It is a wonderfully, exceptionally, beautifully warm, completely, utterly soft, highly gentle amber glow. The completely intensely gentle thermal drafts entirely occasionally circulating profoundly wonderfully directly throughout the intimately small, thoroughly enclosed room cause the deeply tiny, incredibly beautiful, extremely soft golden flame to waver incredibly slightly, intensely softly, completely, absolutely, perfectly, slowly. This incredibly beautifully wonderful subtle movement creates a deeply, totally, absolutely mesmerizing, intensely, perfectly soft, completely beautifully slow-motion dance of deeply long, entirely incredibly sweeping shadows upon the heavily thickly coated, profoundly textured, completely ancient brick walls. The completely sweeping, incredibly wonderful shifting shadows flawlessly, intensely, completely successfully, exactly mimic the deeply profound, absolutely entirely intensely slow, thoroughly rhythmic breathing of a totally, completely, heavily slumbering, incredibly ancient beast. It expands and wonderfully, perfectly contracts completely, exactly, in profoundly, incredibly perfect, beautifully total, complete time with your own, deeply, completely, heavily, utterly, incredibly slow, profoundly relaxing, beautifully, completely unhurried breath. Lining the perfectly curved, thoroughly ancient masonry walls of this deeply silent alcove are dozens of extraordinarily large, exceptionally deep storage baskets. These massive, beautifully rounded vessels have been painstakingly, masterfully woven entirely by hand from long, incredibly resilient fronds of dried date palms, harvested from the distant, sweltering southern deserts. The intricate, highly methodical over and under pattern of the woven plant fibers creates a mesmerizing, profoundly rhythmic visual texture that draws your completely relaxed eyes into its highly repetitive, beautifully endless geometry. The individual palm leaves, having been thoroughly baked dry by the relentless, fierce summer sun, long before they were ever shaped into these sturdy containers, present a truly magnificent, heavily muted spectrum of profoundly earthy colors. There are pale, dusty shades of washed-out sage green, incredibly soft, faded tones of golden straw, and deeply rich, beautiful ribbons of warm, deeply roasted ochre. Over the completely countless, unhurried years, the intensely dry, exceptionally coarse exterior surfaces of these woven baskets have beautifully, thoroughly absorbed the ambient, incredibly fine pigment dust that floats eternally within the enclosed room. This highly gentle, completely unintentional dusting has entirely softened the naturally sharp, crisp edges of the dried palm leaves, rendering the heavy baskets almost incredibly soft to the gentle, resting touch. If you were to lean closely, profoundly closely, and press your completely relaxed ear perfectly flat against the deeply textured, slightly yielding side of the largest basket, you might softly imagine hearing the incredibly faint, profoundly distant, dry, papery rustling of the desert winds that initially, gracefully breathed life into those ancient, deeply rooted palm trees completely centuries ago. Resting completely, silently, thoroughly undisturbed within the deep, cavernous bellies of these magnificent heavy vessels are the profoundly dry, beautifully brittle, absolutely raw botanical treasures of the master dyer's intensely secretive craft. One basket, overflowing completely to its thick, deeply reinforced woven brim, holds thousands of profoundly wrinkled, incredibly hard, deeply dried halves of wild pomegranate rinds. The uneven, highly irregular exterior skins of these completely dehydrated, remarkably thick fruit shells are a beautiful, striking shade of dark, bruised burgundy, beautifully mottled with incredibly tiny, dry patches of pale, dusty beige. When these incredibly heavy, thoroughly rock-hard rinds are eventually painstakingly crushed beneath the immense, staggering weight of the heavy stone, they will generously release the profoundly complex, highly essential tannic acids absolutely necessary to deeply, permanently bind the incredibly bright, beautiful yellow dyes securely to the waiting, incredibly soft wool fibers. In the strictly adjacent basket, resting just a soft breath away, lies a beautifully massive, profoundly fragrant, entirely weightless mound of completely dried chamomile flowers. The incredibly tiny, wonderfully delicate, fragile yellow petals have long since entirely dried, thoroughly shrinking into beautifully small, tightly curled, deeply dry golden flakes. The scent rising from this specific basket is intoxicatingly sweet, remarkably reminiscent of perfectly sun-warmed meadows and completely peaceful, deeply lazy summer afternoons that have long since faded gently into the eternal, incredibly quiet history of the ancient Persian plateau. Dominating the exact, meticulously measured center of this highly secluded, intensely quiet pigment room is the true, undeniable, completely silent heart of the entire, highly complex grinding operation, a truly colossal, impossibly massive, incredibly beautiful, deeply solid stone mortar and pestle. This magnificent, profoundly heavy, completely essential tool has been painstakingly, entirely masterfully carved from a single, exceptionally flawless, unbroken block of intensely dense, beautifully dark volcanic basalt. The exterior, entirely unworked surface of the massive, heavily anchored stone basin remains completely raw, heavily textured, and deeply rough, proudly wearing the intense, naturally occurring scars of its profoundly deep, incredibly fiery, ancient volcanic birth. However, the deeply sloped, beautifully curved interior basin of the incredibly heavy mortar tells a completely different, profoundly gentle story. Over the thoroughly unhurried passage of countless quiet decades, the continuous, immensely rhythmic, deeply grinding circular motion of the incredibly heavy stone pestle has perfectly polished the dark interior basalt rock to a breathtaking, incredibly flawless, completely mirror-like finish. It is now astonishingly, wonderfully smooth to the gentle touch, completely devoid of absolutely any microscopic friction. When you slowly, softly glide the sensitive pads of your relaxed fingers down into the deepest, darkest hollow of the deeply curved, beautifully cold stone bowl, it feels remarkably akin to gently touching a flawless piece of perfectly chilled, wonderfully dark obsidian glass. Resting perfectly heavily, completely diagonally across the wide, wonderfully smooth lip of the deeply polished basin is the massive, beautifully carved wooden pestle itself, deeply easing your wonderfully calm, thoroughly relaxed, perfectly serene mind entirely, deeply, wonderfully into a profoundly heavy, thoroughly absolute, completely deeply peaceful sleep. Stepping with quiet grace from the secluded boundaries of the grinding alcove, we leave the suspended botanical dust to settle in its own time. Our path guides us along the shadowed periphery of the central courtyard, moving steadily toward a hidden architectural marvel, embedded deeply within the northern foundation. Here, concealed from the casual observer by a screen of interwoven cypress branches, rests a stout, remarkably low portal. This heavy wooden door guards the entrance to the sardab, the traditional subterranean cooling cellar, a space engineered with masterful precision to preserve the most volatile and delicate of the master dyer's liquid extracts. The door itself is a testament to enduring craftsmanship. It is constructed from overlapping planks of dense, slow-grown walnut, a heavy timber chosen for its inherent resistance to the creeping rot of lingering moisture. Over the passing decades, the wood has slowly darkened to the rich, bruised hue of a roasted chestnut, its grain tightly knotted and resilient. Broad bands of hand-forged black iron span the entire width of the planks, their surfaces heavily pitted and oxidized by the persistent kiss of underground humidity. As you reach out to press your palm against the timber, you can distinctly feel the rigid, uneven texture of the square-headed iron nails driven deep into the ancient grain. When gently pushed, the heavy barrier resists for just a fleeting second, behaving like a sleeping guardian reluctant to wake. Finally, it yields, swinging inward upon colossal iron hinges that emit a low, resonant, drawn-out wooden groan, a grounding, earthy sound that vibrates softly through the soles of your resting feet. Beyond this heavy threshold lies a narrow, descending staircase carved directly into the living bedrock of Isfahan. The very instant you cross this boundary and step into the shadows, the physical atmosphere undergoes a breathtaking transformation. The lingering, sun-baked warmth of the evening courtyard is abruptly sheared away, replaced instantly by a dense, heavy blanket of profound subterranean chill. The air here carries a remarkably different weight. It is thick and restorative, laden with the deeply soothing scent of wet stone, ancient unfired clay, and the pure, undisturbed essence of the deep earth. Begin your unhurried descent, placing one foot gently after the other into the dimming light. The steps are fashioned from porous mountain limestone, pale and ghostly against the encroaching dark. Yet, these stone treads are far from level. Centuries of careful, deliberate traffic, countless generations of weary artisans bearing heavy ceramic amphorae filled with fragile dye baths, have sculpted the solid rock. The exact center of every individual step has been hollowed out into a sweeping, gentle depression, resembling the smooth, curved belly of a crescent moon. As you step into these worn, highly polished grooves, the stone seems to rise up and cradle your foot, offering a tangible memory of the thousands who have walked this exact quiet path before you. With each downward step, the ambient noises of the outside world, the rustling pomegranate leaves, the distant fading call of the night birds are systematically muffled, swallowed completely by the thick earthen walls. In their place rises a new acoustic landscape dominated by a faint, resonant, echoing murmur that grows marginally louder with every downward progression. At the solid stone base of the winding stairwell, the confined passage blossoms gracefully outward, revealing a spectacular, deeply shadowed, vaulted chamber. The ceiling of the sardab is a magnificent triumph of mathematical brickwork, soaring upward into a beautifully complex, interlocking dome. The small, sand-coloured bricks are laid in a meticulous, concentric herringbone pattern, efficiently distributing the immense crushing weight of the courtyard above with effortless architectural grace. Within this sheltered cavern, the ambient temperature remains eternally locked in a state of late autumn crispness, stubbornly defiant against the scorching summer suns and the freezing winter gales that plague the surface world. Lining the curved masonry walls are rows of deep, recessed alcoves, acting as sturdy stone shelving for the dyer's most precious, heat-sensitive inventories. Dozens of small, beautifully rounded jars sit in quiet, undisturbed rows. Some are heavily glazed in deep oceanic cobalt, holding fermented indigo paste that requires constant, cool stabilization to maintain its vibrant potency. Others, sealed tight with thick plugs of hardened yellow beeswax, contain the highly prized concentrated crimson extract of the cochineal insect, a fragile dye that would swiftly spoil if left exposed to the ambient heat of the upper courtyards. The air surrounding these resting jars is layered with complex muted aromas, the sharp metallic tang of iron mordants, the sour earthy bite of fermenting madder roots, and the sweet, lingering trace of crystallized tree sap used historically as a natural pigment binder. It is a silent library of dormant colors resting peacefully in the cool dark. Yet the true focal point of this subterranean sanctuary, the vital artery that makes this cool preservation possible, cuts directly through the exact center of the stone flagstone floor. It is a narrow, meticulously leveled trench, barely wider than a man's outstretched hand. Within this shallow channel flows the miraculous freezing water of the qanat. This ancient, deeply hidden underground aqueduct system stretches for untold miles beneath the arid desert basin, tapping directly into the deep glacial aquifers of the distant, eternally snow-capped Zagros Mountains. The water that glides smoothly through this room began its journey as crystalline snow years ago, slowly melting and filtering down through miles of porous mountain rock before embarking on its long, entirely pitch-black journey through the earth. It is astonishingly clear, possessing a glass-like transparency that renders it almost invisible in the dim ambient light. Only the continuous rhythmic rippling of its surface gives away its constant unhurried motion. The floor of the narrow channel is thickly lined with thousands of small, remarkably smooth river pebbles. They are a deep midnight black, polished to a dull satin shine by the endless shifting caress of the current. As the freezing meltwater washes over these dark stones, it produces an endless bubbling melody. The sound is a liquid metronome, a soft, echoing babble that fills the vaulted room, bouncing gently off the curved brick ceiling and washing rhythmically over your weary senses. It is a sweeping acoustic wave that gently commands your racing thoughts to unravel and drift away upon the icy current. Let us crouch down slowly, bending our knees to rest quietly beside the edge of this flowing ribbon of ice water. The insulated air of the cellar is dense with lingering moisture, while the water rushing steadily through the qanat radiates a biting glacial chill. This invisible thermal contrast creates a mesmerizing microscopic phenomenon upon the vaulted brick ceiling suspended directly over the moving channel. If you tilt your head back, resting your neck and focus your relaxed gaze upon a single rough-hewn brick positioned directly above the stream, you will witness a profoundly slow, delicate ballet of condensation. Drawn endlessly from the damp air, invisible particles of moisture begin to gather upon the highly textured, porous surface of the fired clay. Slowly, imperceptibly, taking minutes that stretch into hazy hours, these microscopic beads merge together, forming a single solitary droplet of pure crystalline water. Suspended upside down against gravity, this droplet swells at a glacial pace, growing heavier and rounder as the silent seconds tick lazily by. It acts as a tiny liquid lens, bending and capturing the faint shifting shadows of the subterranean room within its fragile spherical belly. The surface tension of the water stretches to its absolute limit, holding on to the gritty texture of the brick with a desperate, trembling grip. You watch, mesmerized as it elongates, transforming seamlessly from a perfect sphere into a heavy teardrop. The anticipation builds quietly, drawing out into a long suspended breath. Finally, the gathered weight overcomes the delicate bond, the droplet detaches in absolute silence. It falls in a flawless vertical line through the cool, damp air, plummeting gracefully toward the moving stream below. The impact, when it finally breaks the surface tension of the flowing water, creates a single, crisp, resonant, bell-like sound. Plink! This solitary musical note echoes softly off the curved masonry, rippling outward through the quiet dark, washing away the final remnants of the day, and settling deep within the very center of your quiet mind, smoothing away the final edges of the waking world, inviting profound, undisturbed rest. Leaving the freezing, subterranean murmur of the flowing qanat behind, we retrace our steps, ascending the crescent-worn limestone stairs with a slow, deliberate cadence. With each gentle upward step, the dense, heavy chill of the cellar is gradually replaced by the welcoming, dry embrace of the evening courtyard. We emerge back into the vast, open-air sanctuary, just as the night has fully claimed the Isfahan sky. The bruised purples and apricots of dusk have gracefully surrendered to a magnificent, sprawling canopy of deep, velvety black, punctured by the soft, silvery light of scattered stars. The air is remarkably still now, carrying only the faintest trace of the day's residual warmth. We guide our unhurried footsteps toward a secluded, deeply shadowed alcove tucked away in the eastern perimeter of the courtyard, an intimate space dedicated entirely to the vital transition between the grueling labor of the day and the peaceful surrender of the night. Here, resting securely against the ancient masonry wall, sits a traditional takt, a raised wooden resting platform, built by masterful carpenters from thick, resilient planks of mountain cedar. The platform sits about knee-high off the swept earthen floor. The wood, left completely unvarnished, has aged into a muted silvery grey, its surface bearing the smooth, polished indentations of countless evenings spent in quiet reflection. The sprawling surface of this wooden sanctuary is generously softened by a magnificent, heavily worn Kilium rug. Unlike the luxurious, deeply piled carpets that will eventually be woven from the wool dyed in this very courtyard, this kilim is a flat weave textile born of practical necessity and enduring strength. Lower your gaze and examine the intricate tapestry of its surface. The geometric patterns woven decades ago by nomadic hands consist of interlocking diamonds and sweeping, jagged mountain motifs. Time, sweeping sunlight, and heavy use have beautifully muted the originally bold colors, softening them into a harmonious, dusty palette of pale terracotta, faded ochre, and a deep oxidized green that resembles the dried leaves of a solitary olive tree. The coarse, woolen threads of the kilim feel wonderfully rough and grounding beneath the sensitive pads of our resting fingers, a tactile reminder of the raw, unyielding beauty of the desert plateau. Arranged meticulously along the rearmost edge of the takt are several heavy cylindrical resting cushions known as poshti. These are generously stuffed with raw, unspun cotton, making them incredibly dense and supportive. They are encased in a magnificent, deep burgundy velvet that catches the faint, ambient starlight, creating soft pools of shadow within the heavy folds of the fabric. The velvet has been rubbed smooth in the center, where generations of weary artisans have leaned back to release the aching tension from their heavy spines. Resting quietly on the flat stone paving just beside the wooden platform sits an essential pairing of traditional metalwork, the afterbay and lagan, an exquisite ewer and basin used for the mandatory evening cleansing. Both vessels are painstakingly forged from solid copper, heavily coated in a thin, gleaming layer of protective tin that gives them the appearance of polished silver in the dim light. The basin is wide and deep, its fluted edges flaring outward like the open petals of a massive desert lotus. The ewer standing tall beside it features a dramatically long, sweeping, curved spout and a gracefully arched handle. Both pieces are absolute masterpieces of galamzani, the ancient Persian art of metal engraving. If you were to trace your thumb lightly over the rounded belly of the ewer, you would feel a mesmerizing landscape of microscopic valleys and ridges. The unknown silversmith has meticulously chiseled an intricate, seamless scene of winding grapevines, delicate nightingales in mid-flight, and complex geometric mandalas that endlessly loop back upon themselves. These engraved lines are darkened by centuries of built-up tarnish, which only serves to make the floral motifs stand out with a breathtaking three-dimensional clarity against the smooth, silvery tin. It is here that the master dyer concludes his physical toil. The ritual of washing is not a rushed utilitarian chore, but a slow, deeply meditative practice of shedding the day's burdens. A junior apprentice has already filled the elegant ewer with water heated over the dying embers of the subterranean furnaces. When the ewer is gently tipped, a smooth, glassy ribbon of warm water arcs elegantly from the slender spout, tumbling into the waiting basin below. The sound of this pouring water is exceptionally soothing, a bright, crystalline, cascading splash that echoes softly against the curved brick walls of the alcove. As the warm water hits the cold tin of the basin, a faint, ghostly wisp of white steam rises lazily into the cool night air, carrying with it a beautifully delicate, subtle fragrance. The water has been thoughtfully infused with a few precious drops of distilled rosewater, yielding a soft floral aroma that elegantly cuts through the heavy, earthy scents of the surrounding courtyard. Observe the quiet, deliberate motion of the artisan's hands as they are submerged into the warm pool. These are not ordinary hands, they are living, breathing archives of his lifelong devotion to the alchemy of color. The skin is incredibly thick, hardened into tough protective calluses across the palms and fingertips by decades of hauling coarse wet wool and gripping heavy wooden paddles. Yet the most striking feature of these hands is the deep, immutable color permanently embedded within the very architecture of the skin. The cuticles, the deep lifelines tracing the palms, and the microscopic ridges of the fingerprints are permanently stained a profound, mesmerizing shade of midnight indigo. This dark, bruised blue pigment has bonded so fiercely with the natural keratin of his skin that no amount of scrubbing will ever fully remove it. It is not dirt, it is a profound badge of honor, a permanent physical testament to his mastery over the vat. To assist in the evening cleansing, a small, highly porous block of volcanic pumice stone known as sang-e-pa rests upon the fluted lip of the basin. The stone is impossibly light, resembling a piece of solidified grey sea foam, its surface riddled with thousands of tiny natural air pockets formed by ancient cooling lava. Alongside the pumice stone rests a smooth, irregular cube of traditional hand-milled olive oil soap. The soap is remarkably dense, bearing the pale, creamy colour of raw parchment. As the warm, rose-scented water runs over the soap, it does not produce a mountain of airy, artificial bubbles. Instead, it yields a rich, incredibly slick, lotion-like lather. The scent of the lather is grounding and pure, smelling fiercely of crushed green olives and the sharp, medicinal clarity of wild mountain laurel. The rhythmic, circular motion of the rough pumice stone gently gliding against the calloused, soapy palms produces a soft, sweeping, abrasive whisper. It is a highly rhythmic, deeply repetitive sound, shh, shh, that lulls the listening mind into a state of profound, unfocused tranquility. As the lather is finally rinsed away by a second, sweeping pour from the brass ewer, the water in the basin transforms, swirling into a cloudy, beautiful shade of pale, milky amethyst, carrying away the loose dust of the day while leaving the proud indigo-stained lifelines perfectly intact. With his heavy hands cleansed and dried upon a rough linen towel, the master artisan settles deeply back against the velvet cushions of the tact, exhaling a long, slow breath that seems to carry away the remaining weight of the daylight hours. Placed intimately near the foot of the wooden platform is a small, ornate brass brazier, a mangle. Within its shallow metal bowl, a bed of incredibly fine snow-white ash carefully insulates a few remaining glowing embers of hardwood charcoal. They pulse with a faint, deep crimson light, resembling the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of a slumbering creature. Sitting directly upon these warm embers is a tiny, heavily blackened copper kettle, humming softly to itself as the water within maintains a gentle, rolling simmer. The acoustic vibration of the kettle is a delicate, metallic purr, a continuous, comforting drone that harmonizes beautifully with the distant, bubbling qanat. The artisan reaches for a small, intricately carved wooden box, its hinges worn smooth by time. From its velvet-lined interior he retrieves a pinch of dried borage flowers, known locally as goli gavzaban. These delicate, fragile petals, withered into brittle husks of deep violet and midnight blue, are renowned for their profoundly calming, sedative properties. He drops them gently into a small porcelain teapot, followed by a single dry pod of green cardamom. With the heavy, rounded base of a brass spoon, he lightly crushes the cardamom pod against the side of the pot. The crisp, sharp crack of the fibrous pod splitting open is instantly followed by the release of a magnificent, intoxicatingly sweet, intensely spicy aroma that blooms instantly into the cool air. The boiling water is poured over the botanicals, releasing a billowing cloud of fragrant steam. As the herbal infusion steeps, turning the water into a rich, luminous shade of deep amethyst, the courtyard settles into a state of absolute, unyielding stillness. The scent of the spicy cardamom, the floral borage, the lingering rosewater, and the faint, dusty chill of the night air all weave together into an invisible, heavy blanket of absolute peace, wrapping around your tired shoulders and coaxing you further down into a realm of pure, undisturbed, and beautiful rest. With the fragrant borage and cardamom infusion now steeped to a profound jewel-like violet, the master artisan reaches slowly for a small handleless porcelain cup, traditionally known as a finjan. The vessel is incredibly delicate, its thin ceramic walls practically translucent in the dim glowing light of the resting embers. As the steaming herbal liquid is poured, the unglazed porcelain base instantly absorbs the heat, radiating a comforting, localized warmth against the calloused skin of his palm. Before taking the first slow sip, he retrieves a crystalline stick of nabat, Persian rock candy, from a shallow, hammered copper dish resting on the woven rug. This is not ordinary spun sugar, It has been painstakingly crystallized over many quiet weeks around a thin, fibrous cotton string. The jagged, asymmetrical structure of the rock candy catches the ambient firelight, glimmering softly like a cluster of raw, uncut quartz. Embedded deep within the translucent golden architecture of these sugar crystals are solitary, thread-like stigmas of pure saffron, harvested entirely by hand from the mountainous valleys long before the autumn dawn. He gently lowers the crystalline stick into the steaming cup. As the hardened sugar makes contact with the hot liquid, it emits a sequence of microscopic, sharp, crackling sounds, a delicate, rapid symphony of tiny pops and microscopic fractures. It is the distinct acoustic signature of tension releasing, of rigid structures softening and yielding to the comforting heat. Watch the submerged portion of the rock candy closely in your mind's eye. The sharp, geometric edges of the crystals begin to erode, blurring and dissolving gently into the dark amethyst tea. As the heavy sugar melts away, the trapped strands of crimson saffron are finally liberated. They uncoil slowly, floating upon the surface and bleeding a subtle, luminous ribbon of pure golden hue into the dark herbal liquid. The resulting aroma is staggeringly complex. The earthy floral base of the steeped borage, the sharp medicinal camphor of the cracked cardamom pod, and now the deeply sweet, almost metallic honeyed notes of the blooming saffron. He brings the warm rim of the finjan to his lips. The slow, deliberate act of sipping acts as a physical anchor, grounding his weary mind firmly in the present moment, dissolving the lingering exhaustion of his grueling daytime labor exactly as the boiling water dissolves the golden sugar. Resting near his elbow atop the flat woven kilim of the wooden platform sits an object of immense quiet importance to his trade. It is a small rectangular box crafted from polished walnut wood, its lid secured by a tiny, intricate brass clasp. This clasp, shaped gracefully like a stylized teardrop, yields with a remarkably soft metallic click when lightly depressed. The heavy wooden lid falls back smoothly upon its miniature hinges, revealing an interior deeply lined with faded emerald green silk. Nestled securely within the recessed dimples of this padded sanctuary is the tarazu, the master dyer's precision-balanced scale, in a meticulous craft where the absolute slightest variation in a botanical formula can ruin a massive subterranean vat of precious indigo. This delicate scale acts as the ultimate, silent arbiter of physical truth. The central beam of the scale is forged from heavy brass, etched with microscopic hash marks that indicate fractional measurements invisible to the untrained eye. Suspended from the delicate, curved swan necks at either end of the brass beam are fine, dark silk cords, meticulously braided to prevent any twisting or swaying in the open air. These cords hold two identical, incredibly shallow brass pans. In the ambient, shifting starlight of the courtyard, you can observe that the polished surface of the left pan bears a faint, permanent, rosy hue, an indelible, embedded memory of the thousands of times it has cradled the crushed, dried bodies of crimson cochineal insects. The right pan, conversely, holds a ghostly, dusty shadow of pale yellow, the lingering signature of ground pomegranate rinds and golden weld powders. Tucked neatly into a dedicated lower drawer of the wooden box is a complete set of miniature geometric counterweights. They are arranged in a descending row of mass, beginning with a piece no larger than a smooth hazelnut and ending with a minuscule sliver of brass that must be manipulated with iron tweezers. Each weight is cast into a precise, multifaceted polygon, its flat top stamped with microscopic Arabic numerals indicating its exact value. The tactile sensation of lifting one of these heavier brass weights is deeply satisfying. It possesses a concentrated, heavy density that belies its small size, feeling solid, cold, and utterly objective between the weary fingertips. Now, in the dead of the night, the scale rests in perfect balanced equilibrium. The empty brass pans hang completely motionless in the still evening air, casting two circular, overlapping shadows upon the woven woolen threads of the kilim rug. It is a striking image of profound symmetry, a visual representation of absolute harmony and rest, gently urging your own racing mind to seek that same perfect, unwavering balance. Having finished the last honeyed drop of the borage tea, The artisan places the empty porcelain cup aside. From the deep-shadowed recess of his woven woolen sash, he draws out a heavy leather-bound volume. This is his daftar, the personal ledger and private grimoire, where the complex, closely guarded recipes of his dyeing craft are meticulously recorded for future generations. The cover is fashioned from remarkably supple goat leather, tanned using crushed sumac leaves which impart a rich, earthy, slightly astringent aroma that rises to mingle with the scent of the cooling ash in the brazier. The surface of the leather is not smooth, it is heavily textured, bearing the beautiful irregular grain of the animal hide, polished to a dull oily sheen by the continuous friction of his calloused hands. There is no gold leaf or ostentatious decoration on the cover, only a complex framework of blind-tooled geometric borders pressed deeply into the dark leather by a heated iron wheel decades ago. He opens the heavy cover, allowing it to fall flat against his lap. The sound of the thick handmade paper turning is exquisite, a crisp, dry, fibrous rustle that cuts beautifully through the overwhelming quiet of the sleeping courtyard. The pages are crafted from recycled linen and cotton rags, beaten to a fine pulp and dried slowly on wooden wire meshes. If you look closely at the surface of a single page as it catches the faint red glow of the dying embers, you can distinctly see the faint horizontal grid lines left behind by the wire mold, a microscopic woven texture locked permanently into the intertwined fibers of the paper. The edges of the pages are irregular and deckled, feathery to the gentle touch, resembling the torn, frayed edge of a soft white cloud floating in the night sky. The ink upon these thick pages tells the long, quiet history of his life's dedication to colour. It is not standard black ink, but a custom, enduring concoction made by suspending fine soot from the subterranean furnaces into a viscous base of boiled pomegranate sap and diluted iron sulfate. Over time, the ink has oxidized upon the porous paper, curing from a stark, harsh black into a deeply rich, mesmerizing shade of dark sepia. The script is a flowing, masterful example of traditional Persian calligraphy. The letters do not sit rigidly upon a straight horizontal line, rather they cascade diagonally downward across the page, seamlessly looping and connecting like a continuous dark river winding its way through a pale, snowy valley. He runs the broad pad of his index finger lightly over the sweeping script. The dried ink sits slightly raised above the surface of the paper, creating a faint, tactile memory of historical knowledge beneath his touch. Here, in these sweeping curves and sharp, dotted diacritics, are the precise ratios of alkaline ash needed to fix the madder root, the exact lunar phase required to harvest the wild chamomile blossoms, and the delicate temperature thresholds for the indigo fermentation vats. But tonight, under the canopy of the Isfahan sky, there is no writing to be done, no new mathematical formulas to calculate. The ledger is simply opened to bear silent witness to the completed day. As his heavy hand rests gently upon the open spine, his breathing slows even further, syncing perfectly with the distant, hypnotic babble of the qanat stream and the slow, majestic rotation of the constellations above. The courtyard has surrendered entirely to the stillness of the night, and as the leather cover gently falls shut with a soft, muffled thud, it gracefully seals away the conscious demands of the waking world, leaving nothing behind but the vast enveloping silence of a deep, dreamless sleep. As the heavy leather cover of the ledger settles quietly into the artisan's lap, closing away the calculated mathematics of the day, a faint, solitary movement stirs within the deep, indigo shadows cast by the nearest brick archway. Emerging with an unhurried, liquid grace is the silent, nocturnal companion of the dying courtyard, a magnificent, long-haired Persian cat. Its voluminous, luxurious coat is a mesmerizing shade of pale, smoky slate, a beautifully muted color that allows the feline to blend seamlessly into the cooling, silver-lit masonry of the ancient walls. The creature moves with a deliberate, almost hypnotic elegance. It does not walk so much as it pours its weight forward, flowing over the uneven terracotta tiles with a breathtaking lack of friction. If you direct your relaxed gaze to its descending paws, you will notice the thick, feathery tufts of silver fur sprouting gently between the delicate, dark charcoal pads of its toes. These natural soft cushions ensure that every single footfall is rendered completely silent, absorbing any microscopic trace of impact against the hard, swept earth. The cat pauses at the very edge of the moonlight, raising its elegant head to scent the chilled night air. Its long, fragile whiskers twitch with microscopic precision, picking up the faint, distant humidity of the underground qanat and the lingering sweet residue of the dissolved rock candy nearby. Its eyes, catching a solitary, wandering beam of starlight, gleam like twin discs of polished green jade, ancient and unfathomably calm. With a languid, sweeping motion of its plumed tail, the feline gracefully ascends the low wooden edge of the tact. It approaches the resting artisan, its body vibrating with a low, steady, heavily resonant purr. This sound is a profound acoustic marvel, a deep, rumbling, rhythmic motor that resonates gently within the hollow wooden chamber of the platform beneath them. It is a coarse, heavy vibration, perfectly mimicking the soothing, repetitive cadence of a distant, turning millstone. The artisan slowly extends a calloused, indigo-stained hand, burying his heavy fingers deep into the thick, cloud-like ruff of fur directly behind the creature's ears. The visual and tactile contrast between the rough, weathered, dye-saturated skin of the man and the impossibly soft, pristine silkiness of the animal's coat is a beautiful testament to the quiet, grounding harmony of this enclosed world. While the artisan and the feline share this moment of wordless companionship, let us allow our minds to drift across the moonlit expanse of the central courtyard, moving gently toward the heavily shadowed western arcade. Here, shielded safely from the harsh, bleaching rays of the daytime sun, lies the expansive, open-faced sorting chamber. This specific room is the final, quiet destination for the fully dried, brightly coloured skeins of yarn before they are securely bundled and dispatched to the master weavers in the bustling city bazaars. The air within this wide chamber possesses a remarkably different aromatic profile than the damp, earthy smell of the sunken fermentation vats we explored earlier. It is incredibly dry and heavily comforting, dominated entirely by the rich, warm, distinctly animalic scent of pure lanolin. This natural protective wax secreted by the Highland sheep to shield their thick fleece from the bitter, biting mountain winters is deliberately and carefully preserved throughout the gentle dyeing process. It acts as a natural, enduring conditioner, leaving the finished yarn with a faint, sweet, grassy odour that speaks directly of sun-baked pastures and rolling, wind-swept hills. Arranged with meticulous mathematical care along the sweeping perimeter of the room are towering, organised mounds of finished wool, carefully separated by their exact micron thickness and specific geographic origin. The pale moonlight spilling through the arched entrance transforms these piled skeins into breathtaking, undulating dunes of textured colour. To your immediate left, resting upon a raised platform woven from dried palm fronds, is a vast, heavy mountain of deep crimson yarn. Let your imagination reach out in the dark and stroke the surface of this bundled wool. This is the structural foundation yarn spun from the thick, exceptionally coarse fleece of the sheep's back, destined to form the hidden, robust warp and weft of the heavy carpets. The texture beneath your imaginary touch is delightfully rough, springy, and immensely resilient. The individual fibres are thick and stubbornly curly, catching the ambient light and holding on to the dark red madder pigment with a fierce, intensely matic quality. When you gently press your open hand into the mound, the coarse wool pushes back with a soft, elastic resistance, feeling wonderfully dense, grounding, and substantial. Moving deeper into the cool, undisturbed shadows of the chamber, the physical quality of the stored material dramatically shifts. Resting atop a smooth, raised stone slab, carefully wrapped in protective swathes of undyed, breathable linen, lies the kirk, the absolute finest, most extraordinarily delicate wool harvested exclusively from the soft underbelly and neck of the sheep during the early spring shearing. This exceptional, highly prized material is reserved solely for the most intricate, highly detailed floral medallions of the royal silk-blended carpets. The skeins of kirk wool stored here have been dyed with the fragile, fleeting essence of crushed walnut husks, resulting in a luminous, breathtaking shade of pale, honeyed amber. If you were to slide a single thread of this golden kirk wool between your thumb and forefinger, the tactile sensation would be astonishing. It is nearly as smooth and frictionless as raw silk, possessing a delicate, buttery slip that glides effortlessly against the skin. The high lanolin content remaining in these premium fibers imparts a soft, satiny sheen to the yarn, allowing it to catch the faint silver moonlight and glow softly from within, resembling a bundle of spun, liquid starlight resting quietly in the deep dark. Dominating the rearmost masonry wall of this sorting chamber is a towering, ancient mechanical device that serves as the final quiet arbiter of the courtyard's daily labour, the heavy baling press. This massive monolithic structure is built entirely from gargantuan, interlocking beams of dark, seasoned oak, a wood chosen centuries ago for its immense, unyielding density and profound structural fortitude. The beating heart of the machine is a colossal hand-carved wooden screw, practically as thick as the trunk of a mature olive tree, descending perfectly vertically through the exact centre of a heavy transverse crossbeam. The spiralling, sweeping threads of this massive screw have been painstakingly chiselled by hand, their beautifully curved surfaces smoothed by decades of immense physical friction and generously, frequently lubricated with thick yellow sheep's tallow to prevent the ancient wood from binding. At the sturdy base of the screw sits a heavy, flat pressing board under which the loose, sorted skeins of wool are carefully stacked and eventually bound with wide, tough straps of cured camel leather. During the bustling daylight hours, it requires the combined, straining effort of 3 grown men, pushing heavily against a long wooden lever to turn the massive screw and compress the fluffy mounds of yarn into tight, dense, easily transportable bales. But now, in the profound, undisturbed stillness of the deep night, the great oak press rests completely dormant. The massive wooden lever is securely tied off and fastened with a thick knot of braided hemp. The lingering heavy scent of the rendered tallow grease mingles effortlessly with the dry lanolin and the faint, dusty aroma of the ancient oak beams, creating a thick, deeply sedative fragrance that hangs completely motionless in the cool air. The sheer looming bulk of the silent press, holding its immense, dormant kinetic energy in a state of perfect static equilibrium, radiates a profound sense of closure and unyielding rest. It stands as a silent wooden monument to the completed labour of the day, an anchor of heavy, unmoving mass that grounds the airy, floating dust of the vast courtyard. The ambient silence of this enclosed room is incredibly deep, padded and beautifully absorbed by the thousands of pounds of soft surrounding wool. Even the distant rhythmic bubbling of the qanat stream is reduced to a faint, ghostly whisper here, heavily muffled by the dense walls of crimson and golden fleece. As you stand in the centre of this quiet chamber, surrounded by the soft, sleeping dunes of colour, the heavy, rhythmic purr of the Persian cat drifting across the courtyard from the distant wooden platform seems to gently vibrate through the floorboards, wrapping around you in a heavy, invisible blanket of absolute peace, sinking you further and further down into the luxurious, weightless embrace of deep, undisturbed sleep. Retreating from the soft lanolin-scented warmth of the sorting chamber, we allow the great oak baling press to continue its silent vigil over the dunes of resting wool. We drift back out into the open air of the main courtyard, letting the chilled, sweeping night breeze gently guide our footsteps along the southern perimeter. The crushed terracotta tiles beneath our shoes give way to a smooth, continuous path of packed earth as we approach a low, heavily fortified structure built directly into the thick boundary wall. This is the mineral sanctum, the fiercely guarded repository where the master dyer stores the vital, non-botanical elements of his trade. Unlike the fragrant, dusty air of the root and petal chambers, the atmosphere here carries a distinctly sharp, almost bracing quality. It smells faintly of arid salt flats, ancient dried riverbeds, and the cold, metallic tang of unpolished copper. There are no delicate blossoms or sweet saps housed behind this heavy cedar door, only the raw, unyielding bones of the earth mined from the deep, jagged ravines of the distant mountain ranges and transported across the desert on the swaying backs of heavily laden caravans. Stepping gently over the raised stone threshold, we are enveloped by a deep, cavernous gloom, pierced only by a solitary shaft of moonlight slipping through a narrow ventilation slit near the ceiling. This silvery beam acts as a quiet spotlight, illuminating a row of massive coarse sacks leaning heavily against the bare brick masonry. These durable bags are woven from tough, undyed black goat hair, a material naturally resistant to the corrosive bite of the minerals they contain. Spilling lazily from the open mouth of the nearest sack is a mound of raw alum, known to the Persian artisans as zoj-safid. This crucial mineral acts as the primary mordant, the invisible chemical anchor that permanently binds the vibrant botanical dyes to the delicate wool fibers. Without the binding power of this chalky rock, the brilliant crimsons and deep golds would simply wash away in the first rain, fading into a dull, lifeless grey. Kneel softly beside the goat hair sack and direct your relaxed attention to a single, fist-sized chunk of the raw alum resting near the top of the pile. In the dim ambient moonlight, the mineral possesses the translucent, frosty appearance of thick river ice trapped in the dead of winter. It is not smooth or polished like a river stone, but highly fractured, its surface a chaotic landscape of jagged terraces, cloudy internal veins, and crystalline ridges. If you were to pick it up, the weight would feel surprisingly dense and substantial in your palm. Run your thumb gently across one of its exposed ridges. The texture is intensely dry and chalky, leaving a faint powdery white residue upon your skin. This microscopic dust carries a highly astringent quality. If you were to accidentally touch your fingers to your lips, you would taste the sharp, immediate bite of bitter salt pulling the moisture from your skin. When two pieces of the raw alum are gently knocked together, they do not produce a sharp, ringing sound like glass or quartz. Instead, they emit a dull, muted, heavy clatter, a deadened thwack that speaks to the porous, earthy nature of the crystallized salt. Adjacent to the mounds of pale alum rests a series of shallow, unglazed terracotta bowls, arranged with strict geometric precision upon a raised wooden bench. These porous vessels hold the darker, more volatile metallic salts used to deliberately sadden or deepen the hues of the dye bath. One bowl is heaped with crushed iron sulfate, an abrasive, heavy powder that resembles dark, oxidized soil mixed with fine charcoal. It smells fiercely of old rust and damp iron, an aroma that instantly grounds the floating mind. Beside it sits a bowl containing copper sulfate, known traditionally as zangar. This mineral provides a breathtaking visual contrast to the muted tones of the storage room. The crushed copper crystals are an intensely vibrant, almost unnatural shade of electric blue, resembling shattered fragments of a bright, midday summer sky somehow trapped within the pitch-black chamber. The crystalline structure of the zangar is sharp and brittle. The faint starlight catching the edges of the blue powder causes the bowl to shimmer with a cold metallic luminescence, a mesmerizing tiny galaxy of blue stars resting quietly in the dark. Moving away from the heavy mineral salts, we shift our focus to a quiet, isolated corner of the sanctum, a space dedicated not to the raw materials of color, but to the meticulous architectural planning of the carpets themselves. Tucked safely away from the corrosive dust is a low, slanted drafting desk, its sloping surface fashioned from a single broad plank of polished pear wood. It is here that the master dyer meets with the ustad, the master weaver, to decode the intricate visual language of the loom. Resting flat upon the smooth wooden slope is a massive sheet of stiff, cream-coloured calfskin parchment. This is the naksha, the master blueprint, the staggering mathematical grid that dictates the placement of every single knot of wool in the final woven masterpiece. Lean in closely and observe the breathtaking microscopic detail of this drafting parchment. The surface of the cured calfskin is not entirely smooth. It bears a faint, mottled texture, resembling the delicate, rolling surface of a calm lake brushed by a light wind. Drawn across this pale expanse is an impossibly fine, relentless grid of intersecting horizontal and vertical lines. These lines were laid down using a specialized straightedge and a quill dipped in diluted soot ink. The grid is so densely packed that it initially blurs the vision, a hypnotic net of tiny uniform squares stretching out over the large parchment. Each individual microscopic square represents a single solitary knot of wool to be tied upon the vertical warp threads of the loom. To comprehend the scale of this undertaking is to surrender to a profound meditative awe. A single room-sized carpet may require millions of individual knots, and every single one must be mapped, calculated, and color-coded upon this silent sheet of skin long before the first thread is ever dyed. Working within this tiny geometric framework, the artisan has used a remarkably delicate brush to paint miniature dots of color into the individual squares, meticulously building up the sweeping floral medallions and winding arabesques that will eventually grace the woven rug. The brush resting beside the parchment is an instrument of extreme precision. Its handle is a thin, hollow reed, and the brush head is fashioned from just 3 or 4 solitary strands of sable hair, secured with a tight wrapping of silk thread. Next to the brush sits a small clamshell, its pearlescent interior used as a miniature mixing palette. The shell holds tiny, dried flakes of the exact same madder red, indigo blue and weld yellow that simmer in the massive vats outside. Imagine the artisan sitting here during the quiet daylight hours, a magnifying lens held over his eye, dipping the sable hairs into the shell and depositing a microscopic bead of pigment into a single square, then the next and the next. The sheer, overwhelming repetition of this act is an exercise in absolute, unwavering zen. Following the sweeping curve of a painted blue vine across the graph paper, your eyes naturally trace the rhythmic stair-step progression of the colored squares, up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2. The visual rhythm of the painted grid is intensely hypnotic, a silent, mathematical chant that gently organizes the chaotic, swirling thoughts of your own weary mind into neat, predictable resting rows. The scent of the parchment size, a traditional glue made from boiled rabbit skin, mingles with the dry metallic aroma of the alum and copper salts, creating an atmosphere of deep, focused study. Staring down at the endless, microscopic squares of the naksha, the sharp boundaries of the lines begin to softly blur and waver in the dim light. The staggering patience held within this room, the years of silent counting and microscopic painting, radiates upward from the pearwood desk, wrapping your consciousness in a heavy, comforting embrace of mathematical certainty. There are no sudden surprises here, no unpredictable rushing currents, only the slow, deliberate, knot-by-knot progression of a master plan, gently guiding your heavy eyelids downward as the geometric patterns dissolve smoothly into the soft, formless ether of your approaching sleep. Leaving the mathematical rigidity of the drafting desk and the sharp, arid bite of the mineral sanctum behind, we step back into the gentle, expansive embrace of the moonlit courtyard. The night air has settled into a state of profound, undisturbed tranquility, carrying only the faintest whispers of the distant sleeping city. We guide our unhurried footsteps toward the sheltered northern arcade, moving away from the heavy industrial tools and towards an intimate, deeply human corner of the artisan's world. This secluded alcove serves as the communal gathering space for the master dyer and his weary apprentices, a quiet haven dedicated to the humble, essential rituals of daily sustenance. Spread carefully across the swept earthen floor is a soffre, a traditional dining cloth woven from thick, durable cotton. Unlike the ornate, heavily decorated carpets destined for royal palaces, this textile is a masterpiece of rustic utility. Its surface features a simple, repeating pattern of wide indigo stripes running parallel against a backdrop of unbleached, raw white cotton. The edges of the cloth are finished with a row of densely knotted tassels, each one twisted tightly by hand to prevent the sturdy fabric from unraveling under the heavy demands of daily use. Kneel gently at the edge of this woven spread and direct your relaxed gaze to the objects resting quietly upon it. The central focus of the soffre is a large, slightly damp piece of undyed linen, folded meticulously into a protective square. This simple cloth serves as a makeshift humidor, preserving the vital moisture and pliable texture of the day's remaining sungak, the traditional Persian flatbread. Lean forward and imagine slowly peeling back the heavy folds of the linen. As the fabric yields, it releases a magnificent, deeply comforting aroma into the cool night air. The scent is a complex, grounding mixture of toasted wheat flour, active sourdough yeast, and the distinct smoky residue of a wood-fired clay oven. The sungak itself is a massive, teardrop-shaped loaf, nearly 3 feet in length, and its physical surface is an absolute marvel of culinary topography. It is not baked on a flat iron sheet, but rather stretched by hand and draped directly over a sloped bed of searing hot, smooth river pebbles roaring inside a domed kiln. This brutal, ancient baking method leaves the bread deeply scarred and wonderfully textured, transforming the dough into a rugged, edible landscape. Run your imaginary fingertips lightly over the surface of the resting bread. The crust is an intricate patchwork of deep, hollow craters and raised, blistered ridges. The dark indentations pressed deeply into the dough by the hot stones are soft and intensely chewy, while the elevated crests have caught the fierce heat of the flames, resulting in brittle, charred peaks that flake away effortlessly at the slightest touch. The color of the bread spans a rich, warm spectrum, ranging from pale, dusty beige in the deeper valleys to a dark, caramelized mahogany along the crisped outer edges. Scattered generously across this uneven terrain is a dense constellation of tiny roasted seeds. There are pale, teardrop-shaped sesame seeds that release a rich, nutty oil when crushed, and minuscule, jet-black nigella seeds, known as shona, which carry a sharp, slightly bitter onion-like pungency. If you were to tear a small piece of the sungak away from the main loaf, the dough would resist with a tough, elastic stretch before finally yielding with a soft, fibrous parting. The resulting sound is a muted, satisfying tear, a humble acoustic reminder of harvest, hearth, and the slow, necessary replenishment of the physical body. Resting just beyond the folded linen cloth is an imposing, heavily tarnished brass urn, a primitive pre-industrial ancestor to the modern samovar, utilized continuously to provide hot water for the courtyard's laborers. This towering vessel sits squarely upon 3 cast-iron legs, elevating its rounded, voluminous belly above a small built-in charcoal brazier. The fire within the lower chamber has long since been allowed to die down. The hardwood coals reduced to a remarkably fine, talcum-like mound of silvery ash, yet the immense thermal mass of the brass continues to stubbornly hold on to the heat of the afternoon. If you hold your open palm a few inches away from the metal surface, you can distinctly feel a soft, invisible wall of residual warmth radiating outward into the chilled shadows. The exterior of the urn is a deep oxidized mustard color, heavily stained with dark vertical streaks where mineral-rich water has occasionally boiled over and baked onto the hot metal over countless decades. The lid, a heavy domed cap of solid brass, sits slightly askew, allowing a minuscule solitary wisp of thin white steam to escape into the darkness, twisting and curling lazily before vanishing entirely. Let us examine the intricate mechanics of the urn's dispensing spigot located near the heavy base of the vessel. It is a masterpiece of functional metallurgy, featuring a thick, rotating key shaped like the broad tail of a diving swallow. The friction between the internal brass cylinder and the outer casing is incredibly tight, requiring a firm, deliberate twist of the wrist to operate. Beneath the spigot rests a small, heavily chipped ceramic catch bowl positioned to capture any rogue droplets. Every few minutes, a single bead of water gathers at the very tip of the brass nozzle. It swells with agonizing slowness, stretching its liquid boundaries as it captures the distorted upside-down reflection of the sleeping courtyard within its tiny spherical form. When the surface tension finally breaks, the droplet falls, striking the center of the ceramic bowl with a sharp crystalline tink. The interval between these falling drops is immensely long and profoundly rhythmic. Waiting for the next subtle impact requires you to slow your own internal clock, matching the glacial, dripping pace of the cooling urn, a process that effortlessly untangles the tight, nervous knots of your waking consciousness. Leaning quietly against the masonry wall, just a few feet away from the resting soffre, stands an object of immense, humble utility. The jeru, a traditional courtyard broom. Unlike the soft, synthetic bristles of the modern world, this sweeping tool is crafted directly from the rugged flora of the surrounding desert. It consists of a dense, heavy bundle of dried sorghum grass bound tightly together at the top, with strips of tough, cured leather to form a rigid, cylindrical handle. The lower stalks fan out into a broad, stiff, sweeping edge. The natural color of the dried grass is a deeply muted, dusty gold, resembling a sheaf of harvested wheat left too long under the autumn sun. The leather bindings, heavily darkened by the natural oils of the apprentice's hands, are wrapped in a complex, overlapping geometric pattern, ensuring the stiff bristles remain fiercely compressed and effective. The aroma emanating from the resting broom is distinctly agricultural, carrying the dry, papery scent of arid plains and the subtle, lingering dust of the day's labour. During the twilight hours, just before the courtyard surrenders entirely to the night, the youngest apprentice takes up this heavy bundle of grass to perform the final mandatory ritual of the day. The act of sweeping the packed terracotta and earthen floor is not a rushed chore, but a slow, methodical, deeply meditative practice. Imagine the heavy, sweeping sound of the stiff sorghum stalks dragging across the rough ground. It is a coarse, rhythmic, acoustic texture, a prolonged, dragging swish, followed by a brief pause and then another deliberate swish. This repetitive motion gathers the scattered, microscopic debris of the dyeing process, the stray, colourful fibres of crimson and indigo wool, the microscopic flakes of crushed madder root, the white, powdery dust of the raw alum, and the fallen, brittle leaves of the ancient pomegranate trees. By pushing this chaotic detritus into a single, neat mound, the apprentice visually and physically clears the slate of the courtyard, erasing the frantic energy of the daylight hours. The sweeping sound echoes faintly off the vaulted arches, a gentle, hypnotic lullaby that signals the absolute conclusion of work. Now, as the broom rests silently against the cold brick, it stands as a quiet sentinel of order, its resting presence reassuring your weary mind that all tasks have been completed. All burdens have been gathered and swept away, leaving nothing but a clean, empty expanse for you to drift safely into a deep, untroubled slumber. Stepping away from the resting broom and the humble remnants of the evening meal, we guide our unhurried footsteps toward a narrow, spiralling brick staircase built seamlessly into the thick eastern wall of the courtyard. These ancient steps are steep and incredibly confined, designed not for grand sweeping processions but for the solitary, purposeful ascent of the master dyer. As we climb, slowly tracing the curving masonry with a gliding hand, the enveloping brick walls briefly compress the air around us, acoustically amplifying the soft, rhythmic brushing sound of our clothing. Emerging gracefully onto the flat, expansive expanse of the upper terrace, the enclosed world suddenly opens up into a breathtaking, sprawling panorama of the nocturnal heavens. The air at this slight elevation is noticeably thinner, possessing a crisp, crystalline quality that clears the lungs and instantly cools the skin. Directly below us, the vast dyeing courtyard is reduced to a quiet, geometric patchwork of deep indigo shadows and silver-lit archways, entirely silent and at peace. Directly above us, the velvet canopy of the Isfahan sky stretches infinitely from horizon to horizon, an endless ocean of darkness saturated with the icy, unblinking light of 10,000 stars. Here, removed from the earthly, heavy concerns of commerce and physical labour, the artisan maintains a small, secluded observatory dedicated strictly to the silent measurement of the cosmos and the slow, rhythmic passage of time. Resting near the low protective parapet of the roof is a small octagonal table crafted from imported Indian teak. The wood is exceptionally dense and heavy, its dark interlocking grain polished to a mirror-like finish by years of careful, methodical oiling. Draped over the exact center of this table is a square of faded midnight blue silk, its edges heavily embroidered with fine silver thread that gently catches the ambient starlight. Resting squarely upon this luxurious silken bed is an instrument of staggering intellectual and physical beauty, a solid brass astrolabe. This heavy disc-shaped device is the ancient world's analog computer, a meticulously engineered map of the heavens used by the master dyer to calculate the exact lunar phases necessary for harvesting specific, highly sensitive botanicals. Reach out in your mind and imagine lifting the instrument. The sheer weight of the solid brass is astonishing, pressing down firmly into the palm of your hand with a grounding, undeniable gravity. The outermost rim of the astrolabe, known historically as the martyr or mother plate, features a raised, thickened lip of metal, heavily engraved with a continuous, sweeping scale of measurement. Each microscopic degree has been chiseled into the brass with a hardened steel burin, the tiny recessed hash marks filled with a dark, oxidized patina to make them highly legible against the polished, gleaming metal. Nestled securely within the hollowed-out belly of this mother plate are a series of remarkably thin, interchangeable brass discs called tympans. Each individual disc is intricately engraved with a sweeping, curving grid of stereographic projections, representing the exact coordinates of the celestial sphere for a specific geographic latitude. The fine lines arc and intersect with a flawless mathematical grace resembling the delicate gossamer threads of a metallic spiderweb captured in brass. Resting flat over these delicate plates is the retate, a heavily pierced rotating top plate that serves as an interactive star map. This component is an absolute masterpiece of metallurgical art. The excess brass has been painstakingly cut away by a master jeweler's saw, leaving a skeletal, sprawling framework of branching vines and sharp, curving pointers that wonderfully resemble the thorns of a desert rose. Each of these pointed thorns represents a specific, prominent fixed star in the night sky. At the base of every pointer, the Arabic name of the star is engraved in elegant, flowing calligraphy, names like Aldebaran, Altair, and Rigel, their curving letterforms dancing gracefully along the rigid brass struts. Pinned exactly to the center of these stacked brass plates is a heavy, ornate axis pin, secured tightly by a delicate metal wedge shaped like the profile of a resting stallion. Fastened to the back of the instrument is the aladeide, a rotating sighting rule featuring two raised vanes with microscopic pinholes used for measuring the altitude of celestial bodies. To use the astrolabe, the artisan holds the heavy device perfectly plumb by a braided silk cord threaded through a thick ring at the very top. Imagine the deeply satisfying tactile sensation of slowly rotating the cutout retate against the fixed tympan beneath it. The friction between the two flat brass plates is incredibly smooth, possessing a buttery, gliding resistance that feels immensely deliberate and luxurious. As the metal surfaces slide past one another, they emit a faint, soft, metallic shh, a deeply resonant acoustic whisper that speaks of absolute precision and timeless mechanics. Aligning the sharp, thorny pointers with the corresponding stars in the sky above allows the artisan to read the exact hour of the night from the engraved rim, translating the majestic sweeping rotation of the distant cosmos into a tangible, measurable quantity held quietly within the palm of his hand. Yet, for the deeply practical immediate matters of the dyeing vats, where the exact steeping time of the indigo fermentation can mean the difference between a brilliant royal sapphire and a dull, lifeless grey, the artisan relies on a different, far more hypnotic method of keeping time. Resting on the flat terracotta tiles of the terrace floor just beside the teakwood table is the fenjan, a traditional Persian water clock. The outer component of this ancient timepiece is a massive, heavy copper basin, wide and wonderfully shallow, its exterior heavily oxidized over the years to a mottled, dusty verdigris. The basin is filled nearly to the brim with crystal-clear water drawn directly from the subterranean qanat. In the absolute windless stillness of the rooftop, the surface of the water within the copper bowl is flawlessly flat, acting as a perfect dark liquid mirror that captures the brilliant solitary reflection of the descending moon. Floating gently in the exact geometric center of this dark pool is a much smaller, incredibly thin bowl made of polished brass. The metal of this inner bowl is spun so thinly by the coppersmith that it appears practically weightless, resting lightly upon the surface tension of the water exactly like a floating golden lotus leaf. The brilliant, enduring engineering of the fenjan lies in a solitary, microscopic, highly intentional imperfection. Punctured directly through the exact center of the floating brass bowl's rounded bottom is a tiny, meticulously calibrated hole, no wider than a single strand of coarse sheep's wool. As the small bowl floats peacefully upon the surface, the immense surrounding pressure of the deeper water forces a minuscule, invisible thread of liquid up through this tiny aperture. The process is staggeringly slow and profoundly hypnotic. If you lean closely over the basin and watch, you can observe the incredibly gradual accumulation of water pooling within the dry, concave interior of the brass cup. It does not rush, bubble, or gush. It simply seeps, forming a tiny, shimmering puddle that expands outward with absolute glacial patience. The slowly rising water level adds a microscopic progressive weight to the floating bowl, causing it to ride lower and lower within the surrounding copper basin. To observe this ancient clock in the dead of the night is to watch time itself take on a physical, liquid form. Your relaxed eyes become effortlessly locked onto the slow, inevitable descent of the golden rim as it edges closer and closer to the dark, glassy surface of the surrounding water. The waiting stretches out seamlessly, expanding the quiet moments into a vast, unhurried eternity. You begin to naturally synchronize the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing with the agonizingly gradual sinking of the brass vessel. Lower and lower it goes, the golden metal disappearing millimeter by millimeter into the dark mirror until the rim is perfectly flush with the waterline. For one suspended magical second, surface tension stubbornly holds the heavy bowl aloft, a fragile meniscus of water bulging delicately over the brass edge. Then, with a graceful sudden surrender, the water cascades inward. The small bowl plunges swiftly through the water to the bottom of the copper basin, striking the metal floor with a remarkably pure, resonant, bell-like clink. The sound is clear and beautiful, a solitary acoustic chime that ripples gently across the silent rooftop, marking the passage of exactly 1 hour. The artisan will eventually reach down, retrieve the sunken bowl, empty it with a soft splash, and set it to float once more. But for now, as that single echoing chime fades softly into the vast star-filled night, it carries away the very last of your waking thoughts, sinking your heavy consciousness down into the dark, peaceful, and utterly tranquil depths of a perfect slumber. Stepping softly away from the delicate, floating brass bowl of the water clock, we leave the teakwood table to its silent celestial measurements. Our unhurried path leads us across the vast, flat expanse of the upper rooftop, moving toward the far northwestern corner of the enclosed compound. The surface beneath our slow-treading shoes is not paved with hard stone or baked terracotta, but is instead spread with a thick, insulating layer of cargel. This traditional roofing material is an earthy mixture of fine desert clay and chopped wheat straw, kneaded together by foot and laid out to bake under the fierce summer sun. Even now, in the cooling depths of the night, the cargel retains a remarkable elastic softness. It yields ever so slightly under the weight of a footfall, silencing our footsteps and turning our walk into a gentle, gliding stroll. The chopped stalks of wheat embedded within the dry clay catch the silvery light of the moon, causing the entire rooftop to shimmer faintly, resembling a calm, pale ocean of dried grass. The aroma rising from this earthen floor is deeply nostalgic and grounding, carrying the dry, dusty fragrance of harvested fields and the baked, mineral scent of sun-hardened mud. Looming against the starry canvas of the Isfahan sky, commanding this quiet corner of the rooftop, stands a magnificent, highly peculiar architectural structure. It is a qanat, a traditional Persian pigeon tower. From the outside, the building takes the imposing shape of a massive windowless cylinder, tapering gracefully inward as it rises nearly 30 feet into the air. The exterior walls are heavily coated in a thick layer of gatch, a pristine, blindingly white gypsum plaster. This chalky skin serves a dual purpose. It reflects the punishing heat of the daytime sun, and it provides a surface so flawlessly smooth that predatory serpents cannot find any purchase to scale the tower. Run your hand lightly across this curving white facade. The plaster feels dry and remarkably cool, leaving a faint powdery residue upon your fingertips, like the dust of a crushed pearl. Encircling the massive girth of the tower, about halfway up its vertical height, is a broad painted band of deep red ochre. This crimson stripe, rendered from iron-rich clay, provides a striking visual anchor against the stark white gypsum, its earthy red pigment glowing softly in the ambient starlight. We approach a narrow, incredibly low wooden door set into the thick base of the cylindrical tower. The door is fashioned from rough-hewn planks of pale poplar wood, bleached almost grey by exposure to the elements. There is no iron latch or heavy lock here, only a simple wooden peg holding it shut. Pulling the peg free, we duck our heads and step gently over the raised threshold. Passing from the open expanse of the starlit roof into the enclosed belly of the dovecote is a profound, almost dizzying transition. The interior is a staggering triumph of agricultural architecture, a mesmerizing vertical labyrinth of shadow and clay. The inner walls are not flat. They are meticulously constructed from thousands upon thousands of staggered, interlocking bricks, forming a breathtaking, continuous honeycomb of small arched niches. This dizzying geometric pattern rises from the dusty floor all the way up to the domed ceiling, resembling a massive inverted beehive rendered in sun-dried mud. Allow your gaze to adjust to the enveloping gloom, guided only by a few stray beams of moonlight drifting down from a cupola at the very apex of the domed roof. Let us examine just one of these countless clay niches in microscopic detail. Each individual nesting hole, known as a lanish, is a marvel of spatial efficiency. It measures barely 8 inches across, designed with exacting dimensions to snugly accommodate the body of a single resting bird while leaving no extra room for predators to maneuver. The floor of the niche slopes slightly backward, a deliberate architectural slope ensuring that the fragile eggs remain safely cradled in the deepest shadow. Protruding just below the arched lip of every single hole is a small, unbaked clay peg. This acts as a miniature landing strut, its surface scratched and worn down by the abrasive grip of countless tiny claws over the passing decades. The sheer, overwhelming repetition of this design, row after staggered row of arched cavities stretching upward into the dark, creates a visual rhythm that is intensely hypnotic, drawing the weary mind into its endless looping geometry. The residents of this towering fortress are thousands of wild rock doves and local pigeons, drawn from the surrounding desert by the promise of impenetrable shelter and scattered grain. But tonight there is no frantic fluttering, no chaotic beating of wings. The flock is deep in the throes of heavy collective slumber. The sensory experience of standing inside this occupied tower is dominated by a profound, enveloping acoustic blanket. It is not silence, but rather the unified rhythmic sound of thousands of tiny resting lungs. The sound is a low, continuous, vibrating hum, a soft, throbbing hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo that echoes and bounces off the curved brick walls. The cylindrical shape of the tower acts as a massive acoustic resonator, capturing the faint, sleepy trills and magnifying them into a deep, soothing drone that vibrates gently within your own chest cavity. It is a biological lullaby, a heavy, hypnotic chorus of contentment that speaks of absolute safety and communal warmth. The air inside the dovecote is noticeably warmer than the chilled rooftop outside, heated entirely by the immense collective body heat radiating from the slumbering flock. It carries a distinct, deeply organic aroma. There is the dry, papery scent of old straw carried in piece by piece to build the nests, the dusty, chalky odour of the unbaked clay walls, and the sweet, musky fragrance of warm-down feathers. This space is not merely a sanctuary for the birds, it represents a vital, symbiotic partnership crucial to the master dyer's trade. The droppings collected from the floor of this tower yield a highly prized ammonia-rich guano before the raw, greasy sheep's fleece can ever touch the delicate botanical dyes. It must be rigorously scoured and cleansed in a caustic bath derived from this very soil, stripping away the stubborn dirt while leaving the softening lanolin intact. The birds provide the chemical alchemy necessary to master the wool, and in return the artisans provide a towering fortress against the harsh desert night. It is a quiet, unbroken circle of historical industry, functioning smoothly in the dark while the rest of the city sleeps. Look up toward the narrow cupola at the zenith of the domed ceiling. From the high shadowed rafters, a single loose-down feather is dislodged by a shifting, dreaming dove. The small white feather catches the solitary beam of moonlight streaming through the roof, illuminating it against the profound darkness of the chamber. Watch its agonizingly slow descent. Because of its microscopic weight and the complex sweeping curve of its spine, the feather does not drop straight down. Instead, it embarks on a lazy, spiraling journey. It catches the faint, invisible thermal currents rising from the warm floor, floating upward for a suspended second before swooping into a wide, graceful arc. It drifts left, then right, pendulum-like, mapping the unseen drafts of the silent room. Tracing the hypnotic swaying path of this solitary feather requires you to slow your visual focus to an absolute crawl. The gentle rocking motion acts as a visual metronome, swinging back and forth in the silver light. Your heavy eyelids naturally begin to mirror its slow downward trajectory. The low rumbling purr of the sleeping flock wraps around your shoulders, a heavy acoustic blanket that muffles any remaining stray thoughts of the modern world. The feather finally touches the dry earthen floor without a single sound, coming to a peaceful, unmoving rest. As it settles into the dust, let your own weary body sink deeper into the mattress, your breathing matching the slow, rhythmic, vibrating hum of the ancient tower, drifting effortlessly down into a quiet, undisturbed sanctuary of your own. Stepping with quiet reverence back through the low, pale wooden door of the dovecote, we leave the murmuring flock to their communal slumber. The heavy, down-scented warmth of the cylindrical tower softly relinquishes its hold as we emerge once more onto the sprawling expanse of the kajal-covered roof. The night has deepened, moving into that profound, suspended hour where the lingering memories of yesterday have fully dissolved and the gentle promises of tomorrow are not yet born. We walk slowly toward the eastern parapet, our footsteps muffled by the yielding clay and chopped straw. Resting our hands upon the low, fired brick ledge, we gaze out over the slumbering metropolis of Isfahan. The city sprawls beneath the starlight like a vast, textured ocean of earthen domes, hidden courtyards, and towering, slender minarets. Each structure is an empire of quiet architecture, draped in heavy velvet shadows that effectively obscure the bustling alleys and mute the chaotic markets of the daylight hours. The nighttime breeze, born in the distant arid heart of the Dasht-e-Kavir desert, sweeps over the crenellated walls carrying the faint, dry scent of shifting sand, sleeping tamarisk shrubs, and the cold mineral clarity of the open plateau. You can feel this gentle wind brushing against the bare skin of your arms, a phantom, cooling touch that carries the whispered ancient secrets of the surrounding wilderness. Standing here, elevated far above the dormant dying vats and the heavy oak presses, the mind naturally detaches from the meticulous physical alchemy of the courtyard below, drifting upward into the boundless philosophical canopy of the night. Look upward, far beyond the glazed turquoise domes that crown the distant sleeping mosques, and observe the slow, majestic rotation of the cosmos. Stretching across the profound blackness of the firmament is the Milky Way, a breathtaking, luminous river of ancient starlight. To the weary, deeply observant eyes of the master artisans, this celestial phenomenon is not merely a random scattering of distant suns. It is the grand cosmic loom of the universe itself. The dense clusters of stars resemble infinite, unspun skeins of pale, glowing wool, waiting patiently in the dark. The slow, imperceptible turning of the constellations mirrors the rhythmic, eternal rotation of a massive, divine spindle, pulling the raw, chaotic fibers of existence and spinning them into the long, continuous thread of time. From this elevated vantage point, time itself ceases to feel like a rushing, turbulent river demanding constant, exhausting struggle. Instead, it reveals its true, gentle nature as a slow, deliberate accumulation, a quiet, unhurried pooling of centuries. The artisans working in the shadowed vats below understand this enduring rhythm intimately. They do not fight the turning of the hours. They surrender to it, knowing that true, lasting beauty requires the heavy, patient weight of the passing years. Consider the profound, quiet sacrifice woven into the very fabric of their craft. The master dyer pours the finite, fleeting hours of his own mortal lifespan directly into the simmering cauldrons of pigment. He trades the youth of his spine, the softness of his skin, and the strength of his heavy hands for the enduring immortality of colour. The wild madder root, plucked from the damp earth, lives a brief, silent life in the mountain valleys before it is dried and crushed into unrecognisably fine dust. Yet, through the meticulous ancient alchemy of the sardab and the the soul of that humble root is resurrected, transmuted into a brilliant, steadfast crimson that will easily outlive the artisan, his children, and the very empire in which he dwells. This is the profound philosophical legacy of the dying courtyard. The carpets that will eventually be woven from these deeply saturated threads are not mere floor coverings. They are woven vessels of time designed to capture and hold the fleeting beauty of a single Persian spring, preserving the blooming lotus and the weeping willow in a fibrous, colourful amber that defies the heavy, erasing toll of the passing centuries. Imagine for a quiet, suspended moment the long, unhurried lifespan of the magnificent textile that will be born from tonight's silent labour. It will eventually be carried away by swaying caravans laid upon the cool marble floors of distant palaces and walked upon by generations of silent, resting feet. Over the slow march of 400 years, the punishing glare of the desert sun and the gentle friction of daily human life will interact intimately with the botanical dyes. The aggressive, vibrant boldness of the fresh indigo and the fiery, biting intensity of the yellow weld will softly yield, mellowing gradually into a breathtaking, harmonious palette of muted antique pastels. This natural, graceful fading is known to the masters as the abrash, the subtle horizontal variations in colour that occur where one batch of hand-dyed yarn seamlessly transitions into another. The abrash is not a flaw or a mistake. It is the ultimate, beautiful signature of human hands, a visual testament to the organic, fluctuating nature of the earth. It is the breathtaking realization that even the most enduring, masterful creations must gently, gracefully surrender to the softening touch of time, aging not into ugly obsolescence, but into a deeper, more profound state of melancholy beauty. This quiet historical understanding offers a deeply comforting philosophy for the weary, wandering soul of the modern traveller. In the mystical, poetic traditions whispered among the looming wooden frames of Isfahan, human existence is often beautifully likened to the complex architecture of the carpet itself. We are each but a single, solitary knot of dyed wool tied firmly onto the taut, vertical warp threads of history. From our highly restricted, intimate vantage point pressed tightly against the neighbouring knots, the grand design of our own lives is entirely incomprehensible. We can only see the chaotic, immediate colours surrounding us, a sudden flash of joyful crimson, a long, quiet stretch of melancholic blue, or a stark, challenging thread of midnight black. We cannot step back from the loom to view the sweeping floral medallions, the intricate interlocking geometric borders, or the magnificent symmetrical harmony of the overarching design. We cannot perceive how our individual sorrow or sudden joy provides the crucial contrasting shade that makes the surrounding pattern blossom into breathtaking clarity. That breathtaking comprehensive vision is reserved solely for the divine weaver, the unseen architect who meticulously mapped the intricate blueprint upon the starlit parchment of the cosmos long before the loom was ever warped. There is a profound, deeply enveloping peace to be found in this humble, grounded realization. You are not required to understand the vast, incomprehensible pattern of the entire universe, nor are you burdened with the impossible task of weaving the entire, sprawling tapestry yourself. Your only gentle responsibility is to simply be the quiet, colourful knot you were spun to be, resting securely in your designated place within the grand design. Let this beautiful cosmic philosophy wash over you, dissolving the heavy, rigid demands of the waking world, the agonizing need for absolute control, the frantic search for immediate meaning, and the heavy burden of the unknown future. All of these rigid anxieties begin to unravel, softening into loose, unspun threads that drift harmlessly away on the cool night breeze. Standing beneath the sprawling, silent architecture of the Milky Way, you are held safely within the vast, ancient memory of the Earth, a tiny but deeply cherished fragment of a much larger, impossibly beautiful whole. The gentle, rhythmic breathing of the slumbering city below, the shifting of tired horses in the caravanserais, the rustling of palm fronds in the hidden gardens merges seamlessly with your own slow respirations. Let the profound, unhurried stillness of the Isfahan night seep deeply into the marrow of your weary bones, coaxing your heavy eyelids downward and guiding your floating, untethered mind toward the soft, welcoming shores of a deep, philosophical and wonderfully undisturbed rest. Slowly peeling our gaze away from the grand, spinning architecture of the Milky Way, we turn our backs to the sleeping city and gently begin our descent. We navigate the narrow, curving brick staircase with a profoundly slow, deliberate rhythm, allowing the enveloping masonry to swallow the chill of the rooftop breeze. With each downward step, the ambient silence of the vast sky is traded for the intimate, muffled quiet of the enclosed courtyard below. We do not return to the sprawling open sorting chambers or the heavy oak presses. Instead, our unhurried path leads us toward the deepest, most fiercely insulated recess of the entire compound, the subterranean hearth, the vital, roaring engine room that breathed life into the great vats long before the sun crested the horizon. The entrance to this sunken chamber is marked by a heavy, sweeping arch of soot-stained brick leading down a short flight of incredibly steep, heavily worn earthen steps. The air that drifts up from this dark portal is thick and immensely comforting, carrying the deeply resonant, baked aroma of ancient fire, a scent that instantly bypasses the waking mind and speaks directly to the primitive, slumbering center of the human brain. Stepping down into the cavernous space, the absolute darkness is broken only by the faint, rhythmic pulsing of a deep crimson light. Dominating the center of this sunken room is a massive, domed earthen oven, traditionally known as a tannour, built directly into the solid bedrock of the courtyard floor. This colossal structure is the silent heart that powers the massive copper cauldrons resting on the surface above. The thick, vaulted walls of the oven are constructed from a dense mixture of mountain clay, coarse desert sand, and heavy animal hair, designed by forgotten master builders to capture and retain the fierce, roaring heat of the morning fires. Now, in the profound depths of the night, the great roaring flames have long since been extinguished. What remains within the dark, cavernous belly of the tannour is a breathtaking, sprawling bed of hardwood embers, slowly surrendering their final captured warmth to the surrounding earth. Crouch down gently before the low, arched mouth of the oven and peer into the glowing dark. The visual texture of the dying fire is an absolute masterpiece of chaotic, shifting geometry. The bed of coals is incredibly deep, a jagged, broken landscape of charred almond and thick apricot wood, chosen specifically by the apprentices for its dense, slow-burning properties. The surface of the coals is heavily coated in a microscopic layer of incredibly fine, snow-white ash. This delicate, powdery blanket acts as a natural, breathable insulator, trapping the fierce heat within the dark core of the wood, while allowing the fire to slowly, imperceptibly exhale. The colors resting beneath this white ash are a mesmerizing, shifting spectrum of deep, bruised plum, rich cherry red, and bright, glowing amber. The heat radiating from the oven mouth is a tangible physical presence. A heavy, invisible, incredibly comforting blanket that washes over your kneeling form, deeply soothing the weary muscles of your shoulders and effortlessly smoothing away the tight, lingering tension in your jaw. Watch closely with a perfectly relaxed, unfocused gaze as the gentle, unseen thermal drafts circulate within the domed chamber. When a microscopic stray current of cool night air slips down through the narrow ventilation shaft and brushes against the surface of the coals, a beautiful, deeply hypnotic phenomenon occurs. The sleeping embers seem to physically breathe. A wave of bright, luminous orange light sweeps silently across the dark, jagged landscape, briefly illuminating the intricate, cubic fractures of the charred wood before fading back down into a deep, smouldering crimson. The rhythm of this glowing exhalation is remarkably slow, mirroring the deep, unhurried, restorative breathing of a heavily slumbering giant. Glow and fade, glow and fade. The visual repetition of this breathing fire is an incredibly powerful sedative, bypassing conscious thought and gently coaxing your own respiratory rhythm to match its glacial, expanding pace. The acoustic landscape of this sunken hearth is profoundly delicate, requiring absolute, unbroken silence to fully appreciate. There is no roaring, no crackling, no fierce snapping of sap. Instead, as the massive, dense blocks of hardwood slowly, gradually contract under the intense, enduring heat, they emit a symphony of microscopic, fragile sounds. Every few minutes, a tiny internal fracture within a glowing coal will suddenly yield, releasing a soft, resonant tink, a sound that perfectly mimics the delicate tap of a silver spoon against a thin crystal glass. Occasionally, a fragile, top-heavy ember will lose its precarious balance and collapse, settling deeper into the ash bed with a completely muffled, powdery sigh. These incredibly subtle, isolated sounds only serve to highlight the overwhelming heavy silence that blankets the rest of the subterranean room. They are the beautiful, fading whispers of a fierce energy that has finally, gracefully exhausted itself, surrendering completely to the inevitable comforting pull of the cooling night. To sit before the dying embers of the tannoor is to witness the profound, beautiful nature of complete, unburdened exhaustion. The fire has successfully fulfilled its demanding purpose. It has boiled the raw fleece, it has heated the heavy copper cauldrons, and it has coaxed the stubborn botanical dyes from their fibrous prisons. It has given everything it had to the creation of beauty, holding absolutely nothing back. Now there is no more fuel to consume, no more intense labor required. There is only the slow, graceful descent into absolute stillness. This is not a tragic end, but a highly necessary, profoundly peaceful conclusion to a cycle of immense physical exertion. The glowing embers represent a state of profound, earned rest, a quiet space where the demands of the day are completely burned away, leaving behind only the pure, warm essence of a job masterfully completed. As you watch the slow, rhythmic breathing of the crimson light, allow your own tired mind to adopt this exact same philosophy of surrender. You too have exhausted the demands of your waking hours. You have carried your heavy burdens. You have navigated the complex, turbulent currents of your day, and you have given your energy to the tasks required of you. Now, exactly like the heavy, glowing blocks of apricot wood resting deep within the ash, it is time to gracefully let the active fires die down. There is nothing more you need to achieve tonight. There are no more problems to solve, no more conversations to rehearse, no more heavy thoughts to drag into the dark. Let the lingering anxieties and the sharp edges of your waking consciousness crumble and turn to fine, weightless ash. Allow the profound, radiating warmth of the subterranean hearth to seep deep into your bones, anchoring you firmly in this quiet, hidden sanctuary. As the glowing embers slowly, inevitably fade from bright amber to deep crimson, and finally to a cool, velvety black, feel your own awareness gently dimming alongside them, slipping smoothly and effortlessly down into the deep, dark, and utterly peaceful embrace of a heavy, dreamless sleep. Stepping away from the fading warmth of the subterranean hearth, we ascend the heavily worn earthen stairs, leaving the breathing embers to their final, undisturbed descent into ash. The night air of the central courtyard greets us once more, feeling remarkably crisp and clarifying after the heavy, baked atmosphere of the oven room. We guide our unhurried footsteps toward a secluded architectural pocket tucked beneath the eastern colonnade. This is the Master Dyer's private study, a quiet, windowless sanctuary dedicated not to the active creation of colour but to the silent preservation of history. As we cross the low stone threshold, the ambient sounds of the open courtyard, the bubbling qanat, the distant rustling of the pomegranate leaves are instantly muffled, swallowed by the thick, insulating masonry walls. The air within this enclosed space is dense, still, and profoundly dry. It lacks the damp, earthy humidity of the fermentation vats and the harsh, mineral bite of the alum storage. Instead, it carries an intoxicating, deeply resinous aroma, a scent that speaks of distant, high-altitude forests and the slow, deliberate preservation of precious things. The source of this remarkable fragrance rests in the darkest corner of the room, a massive rectangular storage chest crafted entirely from solid planks of imported Lebanese cedar. This magnificent timber was transported across the vast desert specifically for its legendary ability to repel the destructive larvae of clothes moths and beetles. The wood has been left deliberately unvarnished, allowing the natural, volatile oils of the cedar to continuously off-gas into the stagnant air. Over the passing decades, the exterior of the chest has aged into a beautiful muted shade of silvery taupe, its surface bearing the faint parallel striations of the carpenter's original handplane. Heavy brass bindings reinforce the corners of the trunk, heavily oxidized to a dark mottled green. At the center of the heavy lid rests a complex, spherical padlock forged from dark iron. The artisan reaches into the folds of his sash, retrieving a heavy, ornate iron key. When inserted into the mechanism, the intricate internal tumblers yield with a series of heavy, satisfying metallic clicks. The sheer weight of the lid requires a slow, deliberate effort to lift, its ancient brass hinges emitting a low, sonorous groan that vibrates through the quiet room. As the heavy wooden lid falls back, it releases a concentrated wave of preserved aromas. Mingling with the sharp, woody bite of the cedar is the distinct medicinal fragrance of crystallized camphor and the sweet, dusty scent of dried lavender bundles, placed carefully among the contents to deter any stray insects. The interior of the chest is lined with faded, unbleached linen, creating a soft, breathable sanctuary for the treasures resting within. This is the archive of woven memories, a collection of salvaged carpet fragments, antique borders, and frayed medallions predating the current era by over a century. These are not whole, flawless rugs destined for palace floors. They are broken, surviving pieces of history, rescued from the ruins of forgotten estates and the heavy wear of countless passing generations. The master dyer keeps these ancient fragments as vital reference material, a tangible library of how organic pigments age, shift, and endure long after their original creators have passed into dust. He reaches down with calloused, indigo-stained hands and gently lifts a single, irregular fragment from the top of the stack. It is a torn section of a floral border, no larger than an open book woven during the reign of the previous dynasty. The sheer tactile sensation of this antique fabric is breathtaking. Unlike the stiff, resilient springiness of freshly shorn and dyed wool, the fibers of this ancient fragment have been softened by over 100 years of physical friction, sunlight, and atmospheric moisture. It feels incredibly limp and wonderfully supple, draping over his heavy hands with the fluid, effortless grace of heavy silk. The edges of the fragment are entirely raw and frayed, a chaotic fringe of loose, untethered threads where the woven structure was violently torn from its original body. Yet, in this state of ruin, the fragment reveals the hidden, complex anatomy of its own creation, exposing the structural secrets that are usually buried beneath the dense, colourful pile. Let your relaxed gaze zoom in closely upon the frayed, ragged edge of the textile. You can clearly see the underlying foundation grid, the skeleton of the carpet. The vertical warp threads spun from tough, undyed desert cotton are starkly exposed. They resemble thin, pale bones laid bare by the receding tide of colourful wool. Bound tightly around these cotton strings are the individual knots of dyed fleece. Because the pile has been worn down to a microscopic fraction of its original height, the structural mechanics of the knots themselves are beautifully visible. You can trace the path of a single crimson thread as it loops under a warp string, crosses over itself, and loops under the adjacent string in the classic asymmetrical Persian knot. The sheer, staggering density of these tiny knots is a testament to the agonizing patience of the anonymous weaver who tied them. It is a microscopic landscape of interlaced fibers, a silent, enduring record of a human hand moving with repetitive, rhythmic precision over a century ago. The colours residing within this ancient fragment offer a profound, deeply comforting lesson on the nature of endurance and the graceful passage of time. The harsh, vibrant intensity of the original dyes has long since vanished, surrendered to the slow, inevitable bleaching of the sun and the abrasive dust of countless passing footsteps. What remains is a breathtaking, harmonious palette of faded, melancholic ghosts. The once dark indigo has softened into a cloudy, bruised shade of pale slate blue, resembling the sky just moments before a winter dawn. The fiery, aggressive reds of the madder root have mellowed into a dusty, muted rose, possessing the fragile, powdery hue of a crushed flower petal pressed between the pages of a heavy book. The golden weld has shifted into a soft, earthy beige, blending seamlessly with the exposed cotton foundation. This dramatic fading is not a failure of the artisan's craft, rather it is the ultimate beautiful fulfillment of the carpet's destiny. The stark, contrasting boundaries between the different colours have blurred and softened, merging the intricate floral patterns into a unified, dreamlike haze. Holding this frayed, muted fragment in the dim, silent study inspires a profound philosophical reflection on the nature of human legacy. The master weaver who painstakingly mapped this intricate border, the apprentice who spent agonizing hours tying these thousands of microscopic knots, and the wealthy patron who originally commissioned the grand masterpiece, they are all entirely forgotten. Their names, their individual anxieties, their grand ambitions, and their daily struggles have been completely erased by the relentless turning wheel of time. They have vanished into the great silent ocean of history, yet their quiet, focused labor remains. This small, torn piece of faded wool is a surviving ambassador of their patience and their dedication to beauty. It stands as a powerful reminder that true, enduring legacy is rarely about individual fame, ego, or having one's name carved into a marble monument. True legacy is anonymous. It is the quiet, selfless contribution to a larger pattern of beauty, a willingness to be a single, temporary knot in a sprawling tapestry that will far outlive the weaver. There is an immense, heavy comfort to be found in this realization of anonymity. In the modern waking world, we are so often burdened by the exhausting demand to build our own monuments, to make our individual voices heard above the chaotic din, to leave a permanent, recognizable mark upon the earth. We carry the heavy, anxious weight of our own identities like a suit of iron armor, but standing here in the quiet, resinous air of the Cedar Archive, looking at the faded, beautiful work of a forgotten ghost, that heavy armor begins to crack and fall away. You do not need to be remembered to be significant. You do not need to fight the inevitable, softening fade of time. Just as the vibrant crimson and the aggressive indigo eventually yield to a softer, more harmonious pastel, you too can allow the sharp, anxious edges of your ego to blur and dissolve into the quiet dark. The master dyer gently lowers the antique fragment back into the linen-lined chest, its soft fibers settling silently against the other salvaged memories. As the heavy cedar lid is slowly lowered, the brass hinges emit one final, resonant sigh before the iron lock clicks firmly into place, sealing away the faded colors and the scent of camphor in the dark. The deliberate, heavy closure of the chest acts as a definitive end to the day's intellectual and historical wanderings. The heavy, protective anonymity of the deep past reaches out, wrapping around your tired shoulders, inviting you to release your grip on your own name, your own history, and your own pressing concerns. Let them all slip away, fading like the old dyes beneath the desert sun, until there is nothing left but a quiet, empty space, perfectly prepared for the heavy, blanketing arrival of a deep, restorative, and entirely egoless sleep. Stepping softly out of the deeply aromatic, cedar-lined archive, we return to the vast, open embrace of the central courtyard. The heavy iron key is returned safely to the folds of the master dyer's woven sash, leaving the faded, anonymous ghosts of ancient carpets to their quiet, camphor-scented slumber. The night has reached its absolute zenith, that profound, suspended hour where the turning of the earth feels almost physically palpable in the still air. We drift like silent shadows along the western colonnade, moving past the darkened entryways of the damp, echoing storage cellars and the dormant, towering oak baling press. Our unhurried path leads us toward a long, incredibly narrow gallery built securely against the outermost boundary wall. This is the Darkhaneh, the dedicated loom house. It is a highly specialized architectural space featuring unusually high vaulted ceilings designed specifically to accommodate the staggering, monumental scale of the traditional vertical looms. The heavy wooden doors to this gallery have been left wide open to the night, allowing the cool, dry desert air to circulate freely and maintain the vital necessary tension within the tightly stretched cotton foundation threads. As we cross the smooth, worn stone threshold into the long gallery, the moonlight stretching through the open doorway reveals a breathtaking forest of immense wooden architecture. Arrayed in a perfectly straight, silent line down the center of the hall are several towering vertical looms, locally known as dar. These are not delicate, fragile frames. They are colossal structural beasts resembling the heavy, stripped-down skeletons of ancient sailing ships moored quietly in the dark. The primary upright beams, crafted from massive solid trunks of seasoned mountain walnut, stretch nearly 15 feet into the shadowed ceiling. They are anchored deeply into the packed earthen floor, built to withstand an unbelievable amount of constant, unyielding physical pressure. Bridging these towering uprights are two immense horizontal cylindrical rollers, one secured near the floor and the other suspended high above. The wood of these massive rollers has been rubbed to a deep, lustrous, oily sheen, displaying a beautiful, undulating grain that ripples smoothly beneath the faint silvery wash of the ambient starlight. Stretched incredibly tightly between these upper and lower horizontal rollers is the warp, thousands upon thousands of perfectly parallel, undyed white cotton threads. The sheer density of these vertical strings is visually staggering. In the dim, shifting moonlight, the taut cotton threads completely blur together, resembling a sheer, highly textured waterfall of pale silver frozen in mid-air, or a dense, impenetrable veil of incredibly fine, heavy mist. The physical tension held within this massive grid of string is practically electric. You can physically feel the heavy, latent kinetic energy radiating from the wooden frame, a silent, static force that demands immense respect. Gently, with the absolute utmost care, reach out your hand and lightly pluck a single isolated cotton string resting near the very edge of the loom. The resulting sound is a profound acoustic revelation. It does not produce a dull, slack thud, but rather a sharp, incredibly resonant, deeply musical thrum. The low-frequency vibration of that single plucked thread travels instantly up and down the massive wooden beams, echoing softly through the vaulted gallery like the lowest, most mournful note of a giant resting harp. Resting quietly upon a heavy, low wooden bench, positioned directly before the towering warp, is a collection of the master weaver's highly specialized, silent tools. In the absence of human hands, these heavy instruments possess a beautiful, dormant dignity. Closest to the edge of the bench sits the daffodin, the heavy iron comb used to violently pack the tied knots of wool tightly down against the woven foundation. The handle of this formidable tool is carved from dense olive wood, beautifully molded and contoured to perfectly fit the ergonomic grip of a heavily calloused hand. The heavy, flared iron head features dozens of thick, tapered metal teeth, spaced with absolute mathematical precision. If you were to lift the daffodin, the sudden, concentrated weight of the forged iron would pull your arm downward with a surprising, grounding gravity. During the bustling daylight hours, the rhythmic, deafening crashing of this heavy iron comb against the taut cotton warp creates the steady, driving heartbeat of the entire courtyard. But now, resting flat upon the wooden bench, its heavy iron teeth perfectly still, it radiates a profound aura of completed labor and heavy, unyielding rest. Beside the heavy comb rests an impossibly delicate contrast, the collab, a highly specialized weaver's knife. This tool is remarkably small, consisting of a slender, polished bone handle that tapers into a short, razor-sharp steel blade. The very tip of this steel blade features a microscopic, beautifully curved hook, used by the artisan to swiftly catch, pull, and sever the colored woolen yarn in a single, fluid, blindingly fast motion. The steel has been honed to a terrifying, flawless edge on a wet, circular whetstone. In the darkness of the gallery, the highly polished blade catches a stray, wandering beam of moonlight, gleaming with a cold, piercing, silvery brilliance against the dark olive wood of the bench. It sits completely motionless, its sharp potential energy neutralized entirely by the overwhelming heavy stillness of the sleeping hour, a tiny sliver of frozen starlight waiting patiently for the dawn. Direct your relaxed, unfocused gaze toward the actual weaving suspended on the loom. The carpet is only about a quarter of the way finished. The lower section of the warp is covered in a breathtaking, densely packed expanse of completed floral medallions, blooming with deep madder reds, luminous indigo blues, and soft honeyed golds. But exactly at eye level, the colourful pattern abruptly stops, giving way to the bare, undyed white cotton threads of the unfinished warp. Hanging loosely from the front of the loom, dangling perfectly still in the night air, are dozens of small individual bobbins of coloured yarn, abandoned precisely where the weary weaver left them when the daylight finally failed. This visual boundary, The exact horizontal borderline where the incredibly complex, vibrantly colored past meets the stark, empty, unwritten future of the white strings is a profound philosophical threshold. It represents the quiet, necessary surrender of the artisan to the limits of his own mortal endurance. He cannot finish the entire masterpiece in a single unbroken session. He must accept the hard physical boundary of his exhaustion, leaving the complex, sprawling pattern incomplete, trusting entirely that the loom will securely hold his place until the sun rises again. Hidden deep within this breathtaking, half-finished pattern lies an ancient, deeply comforting secret of the master weavers, a profound tradition that speaks directly to the weary, perfection-seeking soul. If you were to spend hours meticulously scanning the thousands of completed, tightly packed knots in the lower border, analyzing the perfect mirrored symmetry of the winding vines and the geometric blossoms, you would eventually find it a single deliberate flaw. It might be a tiny knot of pale blue wool tied where a crimson knot was mathematically required, or a microscopic asymmetrical shift in the curve of a delicate leaf. This mistake is absolutely not a failure of skill or a lapse in concentration. It is a highly intentional, deeply spiritual act known as the gol-e-farang, or simply the deliberate flaw. In the ancient, deeply rooted philosophy of the Persian artisans, it is believed that absolute, flawless perfection is a divine attribute, a state of being reserved solely for the unseen architect of the universe. For a mortal, flawed human being to attempt to create an object of absolute, unyielding perfection is considered a tragic act of supreme arrogance, a heavy, exhausting burden that the human soul was never meant to carry. By intentionally weaving a tiny, almost invisible mistake into the grand, staggering beauty of the carpet, the master weaver humbly acknowledges his own human limitations. He physically weaves his own beautiful, inevitable imperfection into the very fabric of his legacy. This deliberate flaw acts as a release valve for the crushing, overwhelming pressure of absolute perfectionism. It is a profound, woven declaration that it is entirely acceptable to be flawed, that absolute completion is an illusion, and that breathtaking, enduring beauty can coexist perfectly alongside tiny human errors. This is the profound philosophical medicine that the silent loom offers to you in the deep hours of the night. As you stand before the towering, unfinished warp, gazing at the dangling threads of coloured wool, allow this ancient philosophy to wash over your tired mind. You have spent your entire day striving, pushing and agonizing over the tiny details of your own life, trying desperately to tie every single knot perfectly, terrified of making a mistake. But the loom whispers a different, softer truth. Your life, like the magnificent carpet, does not need to be flawless to be beautiful. You are allowed to leave the row unfinished. You are allowed to lay down the heavy iron tools of your daily labor and walk away, even when the pattern is incomplete. The deliberate flaw is what makes the carpet human. It is what gives it a soul. Release your white-knuckled grip on the impossible, exhausting illusion of perfection. Let the heavy, unrealistic demands you have placed upon yourself fall away, dropping heavily onto the dark floor like the dormant iron comb. Embrace the profoundly comforting reality of your own unfinished edges. The loom of tomorrow will patiently wait. For now there is nothing left to weave, nothing left to fix, and nothing left to perfect, leaving only a vast, beautifully flawed, and deeply peaceful emptiness for your heavy, sinking consciousness to finally rest within. Stepping slowly backward over the worn stone threshold of the loom house, we leave the towering wooden frames and their unfinished tapestries to the silent guardianship of the dark. The night has now reached its deepest, most solitary hour, crossing an invisible atmospheric boundary where the gentle turning of the earth seems to pause entirely. The silver brilliance of the midnight moon has begun its slow, sweeping descent toward the jagged western horizon, causing the architectural shadows within the courtyard to stretch, elongate, and merge into a unified sea of velvety charcoal. The air is remarkably still, devoid of even the faintest whisper of a breeze, allowing the ambient temperature to settle into a crisp, restorative chill. We guide our final, weary footsteps toward a secluded, deeply shadowed recess tucked along the southern masonry wall. This shallow brick alcove, safely sheltered beneath a sweeping archway, is a dedicated sanctuary for sleep, positioned deliberately away from the heavy industrial tools and the echoing vaults. Resting upon a raised wooden platform within this quiet alcove is the toshak, a traditional Persian sleeping mattress. It is not an intricate piece of furniture, but a simple grounding bed laid flat upon the cedar boards, designed to offer unyielding support to a spine tired from the heavy labor of the daylight hours. The mattress is remarkably thick, generously stuffed with layers of raw carded cotton harvested from the arid southern plains. Unlike the bouncing synthetic springs of the modern era, this dense cotton filling does not push back against your weight. Instead, it gracefully absorbs it, molding instantly to the unique, heavy contours of a resting body. The casing of the toshak is fashioned from durable, unbleached linen, its surface bearing the faint, interwoven grid of the weaver's loom. The fabric is cool to the touch, carrying the clean, dusty fragrance of sun-baked fields and fresh air. Around the perimeter of the mattress, the linen is bound by a heavy rolled seam, hand-stitched with thick cotton thread that creates a tactile, rhythmic border you can trace with a wandering fingertip. Lower yourself gently onto the edge of the mattress and lie back. The transition from standing upright to resting horizontally is a profound physical surrender. As your spine makes contact with the flat surface, you can feel the dense cotton batting yielding slowly beneath your shoulder blades, a patient, sinking sensation that instantly signals your nervous system to disengage from the waking world. Resting at the head of the toshak is a traditional heavy resting cushion. It is not filled with airy feathers, but is tightly packed with dried buckwheat hulls and the fragile, withered petals of wild damask roses. As you let the full, heavy weight of your head sink back into the pillow, the buckwheat hulls shift and slide against one another with a magnificent, dry, rustling acoustic texture. It sounds exactly like a miniature wave of sand pulling back from a quiet beach, a soft, granular shh that gently cradles the base of your skull and aligns your weary neck. The crushed rose petals, disturbed by the shifting weight, release a faint, beautiful ribbon of floral perfume that lingers in the cool air just above your face, a subtle aromatherapy that untangles the final stubborn knots of your racing thoughts. To protect against the encroaching chill of the desert night, a heavy layhalf, a traditional woolen sleeping blanket, lies folded at the foot of the bed. Reach down and pull this expansive blanket up over your resting body. The sheer, overwhelming physical mass of the lahaf is its most comforting feature. It is woven from the thick, undyed winter fleece of the Highland sheep, possessing a concentrated, gravity-laden density that acts as a form of deep pressure therapy. As the heavy wool settles across your chest, your hips, and your legs, it feels like a firm, reassuring embrace, a protective shield that isolates you completely from the vast open expanse of the courtyard. The coarse, curly fibers of the natural wool lock together to trap your own radiating body heat, creating a localized, deeply intimate cocoon of warmth. The aroma of the blanket is grounding and pure, smelling faintly of rich lanolin, dry highland grass, and the faint smoky residue of the subterranean hearth, weaving a sensory tapestry that anchors you firmly in the safety of the present moment. With your physical body secured beneath the heavy wool, allow your conscious mind to embark on a slow, sweeping inventory of your weary limbs, inviting each individual muscle to finally let go. Direct your gentle attention to the soles of your feet and your tired toes. Feel the remaining tension dissolving, bleeding out into the dense cotton of the mattress. Let your ankles roll outward naturally, surrendering their grip. The heavy, pulling sensation of gravity travels slowly upward, pooling in the thick muscles of your calves, rendering them delightfully numb and immobile. Feel your kneecaps soften, the tendons relaxing their tight, vigilant hold. The heavy, anchoring mass of your thighs sinks deeper into the linen casing, pulling your hips down so that your lower back rests perfectly flat against the supportive surface. The rhythmic rise and fall of your chest beneath the heavy woolen blanket becomes the only moving element in your localized universe. Your shoulders, which have carried the invisible, exhausting burdens of your daily life, melt downward, dropping away from your ears and spreading wide across the buckwheat pillow. The dense muscles of your upper arms, your elbows, and your forearms turn to lead, lying motionless at your sides. Your hands, the very instruments that navigate your complex waking world, finally fall open. The fingers curl inward slightly in a state of absolute unforced rest, the palms resting softly against the rough texture of the wool. The tight, clenched muscles of your jaw slowly separate, leaving your lips slightly parted. The delicate, intricate muscles surrounding your eyes soften and smooth out, allowing your heavy eyelids to close fully, dropping like two heavy velvet curtains over the theatre of the conscious mind. Behind your closed eyelids, the visual memory of the courtyard continues to play out, but the sharp edges of the architecture are beginning to blur and dissolve into a soft, hazy twilight. You can still sense the faint silver glow of the descending moon filtering through the thin skin of your eyelids, casting a warm, muted amber hue across your field of vision. In your mind's eye, you trace the sprawling, jagged shadow of a solitary pomegranate branch cast against the pale brick wall opposite your alcove. The shadow sways with agonizing slowness, a hypnotic pendulum-like motion dictated by an invisible high-altitude draft. Watch the dark, elongated shape of the leaves as they slide gently across the textured masonry, expanding and contracting as the moon sinks lower and lower. The rhythmic, swaying motion of this shadow acts as a visual metronome for your sinking consciousness, swinging gently back and forth, dragging your focus away from coherent thought and pulling it down into the abstract, formless imagery of approaching dreams. The acoustic landscape of the enclosed courtyard, once defined by the distant murmuring of the pigeon tower and the solitary chiming drop of the water clock, begins to recede. It is as if an invisible, heavy blanket of snow is slowly falling over the world, absorbing and muffling every stray frequency. The faint, rhythmic bubbling of the subterranean qanat stream transforms from a distinct liquid babble into a generalized ambient drone, blending seamlessly with the rush of blood circulating through your own resting ears. The slow, heavy thud of your heartbeat slows its cadence, dropping into a deep, sustained rhythm that echoes the slow, majestic rotation of the stars passing blindly overhead. There are no more demands, no more schedules, no more urgent tasks waiting in the wings. The world outside the thick, protective walls of this ancient sanctuary has ceased to exist, leaving only the slow, rhythmic rise of your chest, the dense, comforting weight of the wool, and the vast, empty, beautiful silence of the night preparing to carry you away. As the heavy, velvety blanket of the deep Isfahan night settles permanently over the quiet, dormant courtyard, the strict physical boundaries of your resting body begin to softly, gently, and beautifully dissolve. The distinct, tangible line where your weary shoulders end and the dense, cotton-stuffed toshak begins is no longer perceptible to your fading senses. You are no longer merely resting heavily upon the surface of the bed. You are slowly, seamlessly, and deeply merging entirely with its foundational core. The overwhelming pulling gravity that anchored your heavy limbs downward just moments ago now beautifully, miraculously transforms into an incredible floating sensation of absolute unburdened weightlessness. The incredibly thick, woven woolen lahaf draped protectively across your gently rising chest no longer feels like a heavy physical shield, but rather like a cloud of warm, hovering, completely invisible mist. Your resting hands, lying completely peacefully and motionless at your sides, are entirely devoid of any remaining physical tension. Their calloused palms, tired joints, and resting fingertips are beautifully floating entirely freely within a dark, perfectly comfortable, and endlessly warm void. With every single profoundly slow, beautifully drawn-out exhalation that leaves your parted lips, you willingly release a microscopic, invisible tether that was stubbornly keeping you securely anchored to the chaotic waking world. You are drifting gracefully, incredibly peacefully away from the solid stone walls, drifting away from the highly textured brick archways, and floating far away from the heavy, slumbering oak presses. The massive physical architecture of the ancient courtyard is gently, lovingly releasing its final, lingering hold on your weary consciousness, smoothly allowing you to completely untether and float entirely freely directly into the vast, beautifully expanding dark. Behind your completely closed, incredibly heavy eyelids, the vivid, highly saturated colors of the master Dyers world are embarking on their own graceful, exceptionally slow-motion retreat. The brilliant, intensely fiery crimsons of the crushed madder root which previously burned with such profound, intense visual heat in your mind's eye, now slowly, beautifully cool, diluting incredibly smoothly into a soft, highly diffuse, hazy cloud of profoundly pale, completely dusty rose. The incredibly deep, totally unfathomable midnight blues of the heavily resting indigo vats completely lose their dark, deeply bruised boundaries, spreading effortlessly outward and beautifully softening directly into a vast, entirely featureless expanse of remarkably gentle, completely washed-out slate-coloured twilight. The highly radiant, deeply sun-baked golds of the wild chamomile flowers and the crushed pomegranate rinds dissolve beautifully, seamlessly, completely into the dark background, leaving absolutely nothing but a wonderfully faint, incredibly warm, profoundly gentle amber glow that hovers quietly at the very outermost distant edges of your fading peripheral vision. Even this exceptionally lingering, profoundly comforting amber light eventually gracefully begins to dim, fading incredibly slowly, absolutely millimeter by microscopic millimeter, behaving exactly like the incredibly slowly dying, deeply resting embers tucked quietly within the dark belly of the deep subterranean hearth. The vibrant, highly complex geometric patterns of the beautiful woven carpets, the highly intricate, tightly interlocking floral medallions, and the exceptionally sharp, deeply mathematical grid lines of the drafting parchment all gently, thoroughly unravel. Their highly complex shapes completely, flawlessly smooth out directly into a single, beautifully seamless, incredibly soft, entirely blank canvas of pure, completely unblemished, heavily muted grey. Your tired, overstimulated mind is absolutely no longer required to focus upon or process sharp shapes, bright colors, or demanding textures. The entire internal visual field beautifully becomes a vast, completely empty, profoundly tranquil ocean of rapidly deepening, velvety shadows, gently, flawlessly preparing the quiet internal stage perfectly for the entirely formless, beautifully abstract, highly soothing theatre of your rapidly approaching, deeply restful dreams. The highly delicate, wonderfully complex acoustic landscape of the sleeping courtyard follows this exact same, deeply, profoundly soothing trajectory directly toward absolute unyielding silence. The beautiful, highly rhythmic bubbling of the completely distant subterranean qanat, which previously provided a wonderfully continuous, thoroughly reliable liquid metronome for your slowly wandering thoughts, now sounds incredibly, profoundly distant, feeling completely as if the pure, crystalline, icy water were flowing beautifully through a staggeringly thick, heavily muffled canyon of incredibly soft, completely undyed wool. The once incredibly crisp, highly resonant, profoundly musical drop of the silver condensation falling perfectly into the dark, flowing stream entirely loses its sharp, wonderfully distinct acoustic edge. It beautifully becomes an incredibly soft, deeply heavily muffled, and wonderfully, exceptionally widely spaced apart vibration. You rest completely peacefully, incredibly patiently in the absolute quiet dark, waiting gently for the next solitary drop to finally fall, and the incredibly long, heavily suspended silence, dwelling completely between those watery impacts, beautifully stretches entirely out into a wonderful, profoundly unhurried, totally vast eternity. The highly gentle, wonderfully dry, exceptionally papery rustling of the heavy pomegranate leaves, swaying in the exceptionally faint night breeze, completely softens entirely into a profoundly continuous, wonderfully deep blanket of pure white noise. It becomes a deeply comforting, heavily drawn-out whisper that perfectly beautifully mimics the profoundly relaxing, totally rhythmic sound of incredibly slow, entirely heavy, deeply slumbering breathing. The profound, incredibly heavy, deeply rumbling purr of the beautifully resting, smoke-colored Persian cat, which previously vibrated wonderfully directly through the solid wooden floorboards, now entirely completely transforms into a deeply internalized, heavily weighted, wonderfully low-frequency ambient hum that resonates beautifully, gently within the very exact center of your own heavily relaxing chest. Every single solitary external sound is beautifully, completely absorbed, perfectly, flawlessly dampened, and gently, thoroughly swept entirely away by the exceptionally thick, beautifully insulating invisible walls of your rapidly approaching deep sleep, graciously leaving completely behind a profound, wonderfully ringing, absolute total stillness that feels exactly as incredibly vast, completely beautifully empty, and totally undisturbed as the sprawling starlit desert sky. Now, in this deeply suspended, perfect and timeless final hour, there is nothing left for you to accomplish, nowhere left to go and nothing left to carry. The heavy, complicated tapestry of your daylight hours has been completely woven. Its final knot has been securely tied, compressed by the heavy iron comb, and cleanly trimmed away, entirely finishing the pattern of the day. You are resting safely, incredibly securely at the foundational bottom of a profoundly deep, warm, tranquil ocean of absolute unwavering peace. Imagine, with the fading embers of your quiet consciousness, a single, highly smooth, perfectly round, dark river stone gently sinking continuously down through this vast, comforting water. Watch it descend incredibly slowly, completely unhurried, turning gracefully over and over in the flawless, velvety dark. It drifts beautifully, effortlessly further and further down, entirely untouched by the rapidly moving chaotic currents that rush along the surface far above. You are exactly like that gently sinking stone, completely protected from the waking world, profoundly silent, and absolutely at rest. Let your slow, even breathing become perfectly shallow, incredibly soft, and completely autonomous, requiring absolutely no conscious effort, no remaining control, and no guiding thought whatsoever. The ancient, profoundly quiet, dying courtyard of Isfahan, with its heavily slumbering vats of muted colour, its deeply resting architectural arcades, and its perfectly cold subterranean embers, embraces you fully in the safe, heavy dark. The silent looms and the perfectly still reflection pools are gently whispering a final, highly peaceful, profoundly loving, enduring good night directly to your heavy resting mind. Allow the deeply absolute, heavy, flawless silence to thoroughly envelop every corner of your being. Release the absolute final, fragile, invisible remaining thread. Drift completely freely now. Sink profoundly, entirely deeply into the wonderful, heavily waiting, beautiful dark. Sleep. Welcome to Sleepy History with Wesley, your personal sanctuary of ancient tales. Here, we blend authentic historical events with gentle AI technology to recreate immersive, soothing journeys through time. This channel is crafted specifically for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. For your safety, please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, close your eyes and let history carry you into a peaceful sleep.